I'm going to call the city council meeting for the city of Lake Elmo to order here on July 7th, 7 p.m. Please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we have the agenda this evening. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Holtz, a second by Councilmember Hearn. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And then we have a presentation, Washington County Middle St. Croix Valley to Phalen-Keller Regional Trail Long Range Plan. Washington County Planner Andrea Rehm
Yes,
presenting.
yes. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight we have Andrea from Washington County to present the Phalen-Keller Regional Trail Plan. They've been currently doing some community engagement with this project, but she's here to give us the long-range plan of that and what that looks like for the city. Sorry.
Thank you.
Mayor, council members, thanks for the opportunity to present this evening. As mentioned, my name is Andrea Rehm, and I am a planner at Washington County Public Works. And in my presentation this evening, I'll be introducing the Middle St. Croix Valley to Phalen-Keller Regional Trail Long Range Plan and process, including a project overview, updates about community engagement, and I'll end on next steps. We like to begin these introductory presentations with a couple key definitions. The first one being, what is a regional trail? A regional trail is distinct from other types of trail in that its purpose is to serve a regional audience. So it should attract users from across cities and counties and connect regional destinations such as state and county parks, downtowns, and things of that scale. For that reason, we often describe a regional trail as the tree trunk or the highway of the wider trail system, in that it acts like an arterial road that local routes, local trails can feed into. And it also comes with an elevated experience with higher amenities. The county's design standard, wherever possible, is a 10-foot wide paved trail with a 10-foot buffer from the road. And amenities including things like trailheads, kiosks with interpretive opportunities, bike repair stations, and things of that nature. A long-range plan, then, is the high-level planning document that we are developing currently, and that will include guidance on a future trail alignment, as well as the location, development, and operation of trail facilities. Long-range plan is important because a proposed trail project must be consistent with an approved long-range plan to be eligible for certain types of funding from the state and Met Council. Likewise, a trail with a regional trail designation is eligible for annual operations and maintenance reimbursements. And then last but not least, a long-range plan is an important opportunity to connect with the public and partner agencies so that they have an opportunity to participate in the development of the regional trail system. That way our partners and the public can have a clear expectation of how the trail will develop, and that helps them plan their own projects accordingly. One other key point about a long-range plan is where it falls in the overall timeline of a trail coming to fruition. A long-range plan is often what we call a step zero. It's a high-level plan to document the vision of a future trail, and before it comes to fruition, there are 3 additional phases, including a feasibility study and preliminary design, final design, and then lastly, construction. Each of those coming with additional opportunities for engaging the partner agencies and the public. At this time, preliminary design, or the next step for this trail, is not specifically programmed in the county's CIP in the next 5 years. The light green shape on this slide represents our search area for this trail corridor. The ultimate goal is to develop an east-west arterial trail to link the communities of Bayport, Baytown Township, West Lakeland Township, Lake Elmo, Oakdale, Landfall, and one day Maplewood and St. Paul in Ramsey County. Once fully developed, it will connect trail users to regional destinations, including the Middle St. Croix Valley Regional Trail, the Central Greenway Regional Trail, Lake Elmo Park Reserve, and then one day into Phalen-Keller Regional Parks in Ramsey County. This Washington County-led study pertains to the search area within Washington County, the eastern portion of the trail corridor, and a separate future study led by Ramsey County will make that final connection to the Ramsey County parks. It's important to note that for this long-range plan, we are planning in an area that has a lot of past planning work already completed, both the county and the city, and the project team is reviewing those documents and referencing them throughout our process. This long-range planning effort was set up with a 3-tier engagement structure. This graphic represents sort of the relationship between the different tiers. The first and smallest group, the project management team, which includes a representative each from Washington County Planning, Parks, Engineering, and our consultant. This project management team executes all the day-to-day work and acts as the center of information for the other stakeholder groups. The second tier extends to include key stakeholders organized formally into a technical advisory committee. That's where other staff, or other county staff, state and federal agencies, and representatives from the cities and townships fall into. The technical advisory committee is asked to weigh in at key milestones, share their technical expertise, and to act as a liaison with their agencies. The final tier covers engagement with the general public. There we seek input from residents, trail users, residents and trail users at a variety of engagement opportunities, including open houses, pop-up engagement, and online opportunities. As for the timeline of developing and completing, or developing this planning document, the project team mobilized this past winter and spring, beginning with visioning and site analysis. This summer, our focus has turned to stakeholder engagement. In the fall and into the winter, we'll work on route development and evaluation, and ultimately we are aiming for to have a preferred route and a final draft of the long-range plan to bring through the approvals process in summer of 2027. This plan will build on the findings of community engagement, both with the public and with partner agencies. For public engagement, the project process will offer a mix of opportunities, including open houses, pop-up engagement, online opportunities. Our first open house was held on June 24th here at Lake Elmo City Center, and those materials are still available on the project website for folks that weren't able to attend. With that open house, we also launched our project survey, and that survey will be open throughout the summer as an opportunity to gather feedback from people who might not be able to make an in-person event. Throughout this summer and into the fall, we'll be hosting a number of pop-ups at events throughout the search corridor. In Lake Elmo, we are tentatively planning to table at the National Night Out event and the Bluegrass Festival at Lake Elmo Park Reserve. But we'd also be interested in additional events if folks have other suggestions or other groups that we should be connecting with. As the project continues, we'll continue to work with our technical advisory committee and the staff from Lake Elmo who serve on that committee on when to engage this council and your commissions next. Turning to next steps, the project team will continue to conduct public and agency engagement. Then in the fall, we'll be pulling those engagement findings and other analysis together to develop and evaluate route alternatives. Further down the line, looking a little bit farther down, we'll return to this council with those results of the evaluation as we work towards a route recommendation. And that is the end of my prepared presentation, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Questions for Ms. Rehm? Is that
Rehm.
Rehm, sorry. Just curious, how was the attendance at the open house, the first one you had?
The attendance was, as a summer open house sometimes is, a little bit low. We will be re-promoting some of the online opportunities to try to make sure that those materials are as widely available as possible.
You mentioned a survey. Where is that located if people wanted to find that?
You can access it via the project website.
And that's on the planning on the Washington County website, or is it under Public Works,
It's
or
under
where is it under?
the parks, and I'm happy to follow up with a direct link if we want to.
Because maybe
insert
that's
something in the
something
minutes.
we could also get posted or put out in some of our flyers for people that may be interested as well. Okay. Anything else, or is it just me? All right, thank you very much. All right. Did we have anybody that wanted to have any public comments or inquiries today?
No, we do not.
All right. With that, we had the minutes in our packet. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes unless somebody had something that needed to be changed or updated.
Motion to approve both minutes from June 2nd and June 16.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Holtz, a second by Councilmember Dragisich. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those minutes are approved. In our consent agenda this evening, we have approved payments and disbursements, appoint 2026 election judges, approve full-time firefighter hire, accept donation to the fire department from Dairy Queen, approve Lake Elmo Elementary Development Agreement, First Amendment, approve Oakland Middle School Site Improvement Agreement, First Amendment, approve pay request number 1 for test well 6, accept quotes and award a contract for the 2026 crack seal project, accept quotes and award a contract for the 2026 striping project, approve release of warranty security for the Ebertz Edition Drake Motor Partners LLC, approve cooperative agreement payment number 1 for Trunk Highway 36 Lake Elmo Avenue improvements. I'll entertain a motion for approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Motion to approve the consent as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Holtz, second by Councilmember Cragness. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll move into our first regular agenda item, which is presentation and acceptance of the 2025 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report.
All right. Get my presentation loaded up here. All right, there we go. Okay, so my name is Ryan Schmidt. I'm a partner with Schlenner Winter and Company, and I'm going to walk us through a PowerPoint presentation to basically summarize the high points of the audit and the financial results from the past year. But feel free to interrupt me at any time if you've got questions. As in the past, I'm going to start out with just a little bit of a reminder of, what exactly is the purpose of the audit? What is it that we do during the audit each year? So just at a really high level, an audit essentially consists of us obtaining your financial records and information from the past year, 2025, and performing various procedures over this, kind of as laid out on the screen here. Really the majority of it is the sampling and the detailed testing. We're looking at the individual transactions that are in your accounting system, and we're looking at the support behind those, whether it be supporting invoices or bank statement activity or reports from the county or the state for the funding you receive, all for the purpose of verifying that information, because that's what comes together and makes up the financial statements. So then we express an opinion on those financials and whether or not we feel that they are accurate. The opinion we've given this year is what's called an unmodified opinion, which is the best you can achieve. The next slide here just kind of walks through some other required communications. So yes, you got the clean opinion, but how did the audit process go? Did we have any difficulties getting the information we needed? Did we see any unusual transactions, anything strange with accounting policies, etc.? As you can see from the slide here, nothing along those lines. Everything went smoothly and as expected. As part of the audit, we also have to look at your controls and the processes that are behind the numbers. And we generally have a few findings or items to report here. One that's very common in our audits is an audit adjustment finding. That's the topic on the left-hand side here. In your audit, we actually don't have that finding, which is great to see. Basically what that means is, although we do assist with maybe some certain year-end adjustments or some cleanup, none of those journal entries, none of those audit adjustments were significant to the point where we needed to put a finding in the report. So that is a good thing to see. The next item here, the center bullet point, this is by far the most common thing that we report. This is just a lack of segregation of duties. Most of the accounting functions in the city, I would say, are, there's oversight in place, there is good segregation of duties, but there's just a few areas, whether it be with, the bank reconciliation or certain other areas where there's just people who have kind of complete access or the ability to see the whole accounting system or modify the whole accounting system. So that's something to be aware of and just implement oversight and ask questions wherever you can. And then on the right-hand side, as part of the audit, we also have to review your compliance with Minnesota statutes. The state gives us various checklists. How did you go about contracting and bidding for your projects? Where do you keep your cash and investments? So on and so forth. We did not identify any legal compliance issues. Everything looked good there. The next page, get into the numbers a little bit here. I'm going to start out with a big picture look at the general fund. We have a trend analysis here, 2021 through 2025, and then we also have the 2025 budget on there as well. So just a really big picture look for start compared to the budget. Revenues did exceed budgeted amounts by about $2,282,000. Expenditures, however, were below budget by about $97,000. So overall, you had budgeted for just a slight increase in your fund balance of about $35,000. Your actual increase in the general fund balance for the year was a little under $2.3 million. Now the next two pages, still looking at the general fund, we break down those same revenues and expenditures into a little bit greater detail. So the first page here focuses on revenues. Just compared to the budget, going across some of the bigger categories here, you can see, of course, the majority of your revenues in the general fund do come from taxes and assessments. Very close to budget in this category. The next one over, licenses and permits. This is probably where you had the one of the larger deviations. You had additional permit revenue, about $676,000. Next category, state grants, caused the intergovernmental category to be over budget, about $434,000. Charges for services, over in that category, about $406,000. And then investment earnings, up from the prior year, about $427,000. Over budget, about $788,000. Next page, same layout, but looking at the expenditure side of things for the general fund. General government, administrative type expenses, here you were under budget, about $138,000. The public safety category, that's where you had the largest excess of budget, but actually, so looking at the numbers here, you were over budget $325,000. About half of that is because there's flow through state aid that comes from the state and goes to the Fire Relief Association on behalf of the city. And in the financials, we were required to gross that up as a revenue and an expense because it flows through the city, but that's not included in your budget. So that was about $171,000, and that's causing about half of that excess over budget that you're seeing in that category. Public Works, very close, and Culture and Rec, about $215,000 under budget. Next page, looking at the unassigned fund balance at the end of the year, turned into a ratio. You have a policy in place to look at your unassigned fund balance as a percentage of the next year's budgeted expenditures. And based on your policy, this shouldn't be less than 50 to 60%. And as you can see, you've been on an upward trend and you're well in excess of your policy at the end of the year. And the next page just shows cash. If you just want to see your cash balance trend over the past 5 years, quite a bit of a spike here in 2025, up about $9.3 million. Part of the cause for that, your fund balance didn't go up by $9.3 million. Part of the cause is that you have escrow dollars from some of the projects around the city, and with those escrow dollars, there's an offsetting liability. So you have more cash on hand, but fund balance is assets minus liabilities, so even though your cash went way up, your overall fund balance didn't go up by that significant of an amount. All right, with that, we'll move away from the general fund and touch on some of your other funds here briefly. This page, these are more like fund categories. You have a lot of individual debt service funds, you have a lot of capital project funds. For the purpose of streamlining things a little bit here, this is more of a big picture look at your debt service funds and your capital project funds. Debt service activity was pretty standard here. You have your revenues from taxes and assessments, expenditures for debt payments, overall an increase of about $442,000 in aggregate. Capital project funds, some of the larger projects or areas with larger activity here, your ball field project, about $3 million of the expenditures shown, about $1.9 million for the 2025 street and utility, so on and so forth. Overall, for the year, you had a decrease here of about $4 million. And the next page just shows the cash trend in both of those categories over the past 5 years. You can see debt service has been on a pretty steady, slow upward trend, and capital projects jumps around a little bit from year to year based on the timing of when you issue debt and then as you pay down that cash. Decrease of about $1.3 million in cash there for the year. With that, we'll move into your proprietary funds, your water sewer fund and storm sewer fund. The first page here being your water fund. The graph at the top is primarily focused on operating revenues and expenses, which pertains to the table down at the bottom. It's the same information. One extra item I threw on there this year is that green bar, which would be the operating revenues from below. plus your connection fees, which I thought was an interesting addition, just because your connection fees generally speaking, they're not considered to be an operating revenue, but they are recurring for the city over recent years, and they're quite significant. So you can see how that brings your overall revenues on the graph quite a bit closer and more in line with the operating expenses. But just compared to the prior year, operating revenues were up about $539,000. Operating expenses up about $750,000. And then you have that non-operating activity, connection fees, grants, and about $4.1 million of developer contributions of infrastructure. So that's non-cash contributions where the developers turn over the infrastructure, and it's an asset for the city, so it gets recognized as a revenue at that time. Next page, same layout and kind of the same explanations for the most part for the sewer fund here. Compared to the prior year, operating revenues increased about $256,000, operating expenses up about $292,000, and then significant non-operating revenues again from grants or connection fees, special assessments, then about 4.6 of developer contributed infrastructure.
Sorry, can you just dig into that a little bit more for me? So the operating revenue plus connection fees, are you saying the majority of that additional revenue that comes from the connection fees is coming from the developers turning over those assets to the city?
Actually, those are separate things. So in the graph down at the bottom, you see the 9.2 million under non-operating. So about 2.6 million of that is cash from connection fees. About 1.4 million is special assessment revenue, and then 4.6 million is just the infrastructure asset that's being recognized as it's been turned over to the city from the developer.
So that 4 million's not recurring on an annual basis if we'd stop growing, but the remainder of it is?
Well, the connection fees, if you stopped growing, I would assume there wouldn't be connection fees anymore, right? That would taper off significantly.
Yes.
The difference is the connection fees, that is cash that's coming in for the city, whereas the developer contributions of that 4.6 million, it's not really it's not a cash contribution, it's that they're taking that infrastructure and turning it over to the city for the city to maintain. In a way, you could almost think of it as a liability because it has to be maintained going forward, but it is an asset that gets put on the books, and as a result, you recognize a revenue.
Okay.
All right, and then the storm sewer fund here. Here, revenues were pretty flat compared to the prior year. Operating revenues dropped about $9,500. Operating expenses up about $280,000. Most of that was just an increase in depreciation expense, so a non-cash item. And then the non-operating there of about $6.3 million. That's almost entirely developer contributions, so non-cash assets being recognized. So with that, an overall increase in net position of about $5.5 million. And the next page shows the cash in each of these funds over the past 5 years, and you can kind of see how even though you had some significant increases in net position on the last few slides, the cash has maintained a lot flatter, or the increases haven't been as significant because of the non-cash items we talked about. But the sewer at the top increased about $285,000, water jumped by about $3.2 million, and storm sewers held pretty steady, just a slight decrease there. All right, with that, we'll move away from the individual funds and just take a moment to look at everything wrapped together. So in the financial statements, there's the fund level information that we kind of just went through, and there's also the government-wide financials where everything gets wrapped together and put on a full accrual basis of accounting, where you infrastructure and long-term debt and all these long-term items. So that's what we're looking at here. Just big picture compared to the prior year for the city, you can see you've had increases in both current assets and infrastructure, those non-current assets, compared to the previous year. Next page, kind of a similar layout and similar results here for liabilities. increase in both those current and non-current categories. And then the following page is maybe a little more useful, where we take those same assets and liabilities from the past two slides, and the net between the two is that green bar. So you can see on a net basis how things have trended. Now, a lot of the reason for the sharpness of that increase is due to the assets that are being recognized from from your capital projects and from the infrastructure being turned over from developers. And then just two final slides for informational purposes here. Based on the debt that was outstanding at the end of the year, these slides show the future payments that are due each year. So this isn't the balance outstanding each year, this is the amount of principal and interest that's due each year. You can see how that tapers off as the various debt issuances get paid over the years. So governmental fund debt being the debt being financed by property taxes and assessments. And then the next page for the proprietary funds being financed by your utilities. Any questions?
Questions for Mr. Schmidt? Councilmember Holtz.
Thank you for that. Just quick question on for both the sewer and water, are those trends pretty similar for what you've seen in other second ring or third ring suburbs in terms of both the revenue levels, operating costs? I mean, we're not Minneapolis, but we're also not Litchfield.
Sure. Yeah, you know, it fluctuates a lot. Lake Elmo is a very high growth city, so it's just as far as the connection fees and the impact on the financials from those developer contributions. I mean, it's hard to compare, but I would say financially, it seems like things are pretty strong. I don't have any concerns from that standpoint.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Dragisich.
City has a fund balance net position policy they adopted in 2017 that restricts the net position of water and sewer utilities, WAC and SAC, for the purposes of infrastructure and debt service. But I don't see that restriction in the net position in the statements. I'm confused as to why that doesn't show up.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't aware of that. I don't know if Clarissa, you have a.
We actually have discussed this, because you had asked this question before, and I think it had come down to, we've essentially spent, consistently spent, because it's allowed for capital assets, that there isn't remaining funds that are restricted at this point.
This
Not-
rings a
not
bell now, 'cause
restricted,
can it be used for the debt service payments as well?
Correct.
Okay,
It's
okay.
used for capital or debt, but, so every penny we've collected in SAC and WAC has been spent for capital or debt? Okay.
I'd have to I could show that at some point, but that was my understanding. And again, this was a conversation that we had quite a few months ago, and I'm going from some deep recollection. So I would have to kind of refresh my memory, but that is my understanding.
Okay. Yes, I asked that before, but I thought maybe it'd show up in this year's audit, that there'd be some of that restricted net asset, but there just wasn't any.
Sure. Well, it's something that we could look into if you look into it and think that we need to dive a little further.
Can we clarify, because I think the restricted was a different terminology we're supposed to be using for that, correct?
Committed?
Because restricted is for legal standpoint.
Yeah, so restricted would be if there's an outside party, whether it be a donor or Minnesota statutes that are saying it has to be spent for that. Committed would be if the council had a formal action or a policy in place saying that it should be used for that. Otherwise, assigned is kind of more informal. Those are kind of the three categories.
Yeah, the city has a formal policy on this.
Yeah, so it would be a committed balance if the dollars haven't been spent yet.
Okay.
That it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Second on our agenda here is purchasing policy revisions with Finance Director Clarissa Hadler presenting.
If you're okay with me just doing it from here.
Oh, you didn't wear your stand-in shoes tonight, or what?
Actually.
Well, that's fine.
So this, It's essentially a follow-up to our workshop discussion from May, where we had talked through some revisions and clarifications within the purchasing policy. I did remember to put a red line version in your packet this time, so let me know if you have any questions on that. I then, so there's the red line would have been the May. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. So the red line version is the May version essentially, and then we made some slight tweaks after that discussion, based on that discussion, that I then highlighted. So that's the two types of changes within that. So just some real quick for the first, for that May, those initial changes we made, we were really doing sort of a broad sweep to try and align the policy with our practices, as well as clarify some issues that were just not very understandable within that. We also added the quick reference guide to clarify some options for the procurement and purchasing amounts and approvals necessary. We consolidated the construction, contract services, and purchase contracts and the professional services section into one section. We clarified the definition of the term contract and the approval authority with legal's help. We clarified which purchases are delegated to the city administrator. We clarified some lease language. And then lots of clarifying language. So then at that meeting, there were a number of discussions. We talked about changing the purchasing threshold, so we changed that purchasing threshold that from the 10,000 to the 15,000 for the city administrator purchases. We also added a little bit of language requiring the report of the disbursements. So Councilmember Dragisich had brought up the statute that required this report. We technically hadn't been using the delegation much. So most, 98% of the purchases were actually coming through council for approval at the time. We have talked about revising our practices a little bit and utilizing that delegation, so I can get more into that in a bit. And then we added some language describing the level of budgetary control and clarifying that, and then encouraging budget amendments. So back to the approval lists. With our new software, it should be really straightforward for us to revise how we report that. So we have an automated workflow that flows through department heads and the city administrator based on the amount. I added an additional field where we can check a box if it needs council approval. So you'll have two lists. So you will essentially be reporting these amounts that are approved to the city administrator, or delegated to the city administrator, and then the council list as well. We had a discussion about some possible increased budgetary control. So I wrote a pretty lengthy section about that. We can discuss that further if council would like. I'm hoping that the language that I had added to the policy regarding budget amendments is sufficient at this time, and we can go into that again for additional or further if we need to. And that's pretty much the gist of it. If you have any questions or wanted to chat about anything.
Questions from council?
I also made Ryan stick around in case you had questions and you needed answered from the auditor.
I don't have any questions. Do you have any questions? Councilmember Dragisich, any
I have some
question?
comments, but no questions.
I actually do have a quick question.
Okay.
So just to confirm from our conversation earlier, it does say, so budget amendments should be submitted for review and approval by the city council as appropriate. From our conversation earlier, I thought you said that wasn't necessarily the process that has been followed or wasn't included in this, and I might have just missed that. I guess before I discuss it, I just want to make sure I'm
Right. So
understanding what we're putting in here for the budget amendment process?
I think we're trying to nudge so it's been sort of on the to-do list, if you will, for improved processes, is to add a better process for these budget amendments for staff. So we haven't done many, maybe a couple throughout the years. Mind you, I've only been here a few years. So I think the intent of the added language was to nudge us forward within that.
To require a budget amendment take place if a department would make a purchase that would put them over their department budget.
I think the language is a little softer than that. It was, not sure I have it
The legal
right in
thing of
front of me,
should
but.
versus shall.
Oh, so if you took the very last paragraph in my memo, without the underlined portion, is essentially the language that's in the policy draft right now. So if you wanted to strengthen that, we could add the generally established department level, add the however, within any department, should a line item, oh, no, wait, that's discussing the line item.
And, yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, specifically, I'm just asking about the departmental budget total. If that
I'd have
goes
to go
over.
to
I'm
that
sorry,
page.
that's what I was trying to ask earlier. I must have not asked that right.
So my point is I think the language maybe doesn't say require, it might say is suggested, or
It says
it might be
should.
softer. Does it say should?
Budget amendment should be submitted, I guess, I don't know. Councilmember Holtz, this is you know, I know you always bring up the shall versus should type language. on
Well,
page
in this
3.
case, it's saying, should it come up, it shall be necessary. So in that case, it's saying it shall be necessary.
Are we looking at the same page? Page 3, the level of budgetary control is established at the department level.
Yep.
Expenditures for department that exceed appropriations are not authorized unless additional revenue sources, unspent appropriations, or fund balances are identified and available.
And then the new
Budget
section.
amendments should be submitted for review and approval by the city council as appropriate.
Okay, that's stronger language than I remember putting in there, so,
Okay. Thank you.
you bet.
And to clarify, you had mentioned with the new software, you can then program and determine based upon thresholds, the routing of it.
Yes, I have to tweak it. Right now, we've just added a manual process where department heads and our AP clerk will essentially manage that for us.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. If there aren't any further questions, I believe I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to adopt revisions to the City of Lake Elmo purchasing policy.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Holtz, a second by Councilmember Hearn. Discussion. Councilmember Holtz.
Thank you for getting this all together. It was a thorough workshop discussion, but I mean, the things are all in there. I appreciate the work that was put in. I also appreciate that the discussion did overall lead to things that I think are a value gain. I certainly want anything to be have anything that's overly cumbersome, but I also think it's worthwhile to have things that are in there that are a value gain for both for staff, for the city, for constituents. I especially appreciate that we're making sure that thresholds are being updated to what current costs reflect. So that to me is a very good value. I do enjoy the fact that the software has the ability to do that. That to me is one of the reasons why we went with that software to begin with. Because if it makes lives easier and the workflow easier for staff, that is why we got it. Above and beyond that, I don't have anything else original to add.
Councilmember Jurgensen.
I'm going to go back to my discussion about the change orders. You know, this policy, again, allows the city administrator to approve a change order of up to $100,000. My concern, at first, I don't like a change of $100,000 being approved administratively, but secondly, it's an individual change order. So you could have a number of change orders on a project, as long as none of them exceed $100,000, they could all be approved by the city administrator. If you look at our project list and talk about, the project budget is the bid plus a contingency. An average contingency is 10%. They have ranges, but on the average, 10% is a pretty reasonable number. So over the course of our 10-year CIP, this would authorize the city administrator to approve change orders, running from about $400,000 a year to $3.5 million in 2026, as long as any one change order does not exceed $100,000. That concerns me. First of all, because our city administrator does not have formal education or experience in construction management or construction finance. She has to rely on someone else to make those, or whatever she relies on. But the other thing that concerns me is our government is built on a principle of openness and transparency. Allowing an appointed city manager to approve individual change orders up to $100,000 and change orders in total in excess of $1 million or more without any public discussion or specific council approval puts these expenses in the shadows of government, where citizens and elected officials only find out about it after they're made. I cannot, in good conscience, look our constituents in the eye and tell them this is good government and supports the concept of openness and transparency. I'm sorry. I just have a hard time saying an appointed official could approve up to $1 million in change orders, as long as any one doesn't exceed $100,000. And we have no input into it as elected official. The public has no discussion of it. We find out about it when the next pay request comes in. That just seems wrong to me.
Didn't we have discussion about that as far as for the accumulation? I thought that came up.
This policy says a change order.
In
And
the
long as
workshop,
it,
and
long
I'm
as the
just
change
asking
order
in the work.
doesn't exceed the budget for the project, which is the contract plus the contingency.
So, and I'm just asking, because I don't disagree that an accumulation of $1 million in change orders is a large concern. I thought, I can't remember what we came to in the discussion, because I thought this topic came up as far as the sequential change orders, each individually being under 100,000. Am I recall, did we have that?
Yep.
What was do you remember what we got to on that?
I thought was there a review of other cities' policies on how they handle change orders or how that typically is? I would ask maybe Jack, since he's been with the city for a while and deals with change orders, has dealt with change orders on projects in the past, capital construction projects. Because I know that our engineer does review, balance those out for cost, scope, time, equipment, material. Those get reviewed by our engineer, correct?
Correct, Mr., I'll let Jack speak.
Mayor and Council, yeah, it's, historically, I think some of those numbers went up when we had those busy seasons with the grant agreements, and we had $5 million projects at a time, things like that. And there was a lot of change orders, and you're trying to keep these projects moving and giving answers to contractors on a quicker basis. So the other part of that is when we come to the council to award a contract, we present a total project budget, not just the contractor's costs. And we have a contingency budget in there, and what we're looking for is direction from council when we kick the project off of a total project budget, and that's what we're managing to. So all those internal and cumulative things also, the other part of that, and maybe it doesn't say it in the policy or not, but you have to manage that budget. If you're going over that budget, you have to come back. So that's always been the criteria when we're managing these projects, regardless of what your policy is. That authorized budget is what we're looking at all along the way.
So is that in our policy written that if the budget exceeds the authorized budget at bid, that change order would come back?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Sure.
if the budget would be exceeded, which includes a contract award plus the contingency,
Yeah.
then it'd have to come back to the city council. But let's take a $5 million project with a 10% contingency.
Sure.
$500,000. This policy authorizes $500,000 to be spent without any public discussion or council approval, as long as any one change order doesn't exceed $100,000.
Do you contend then that, I mean, when you say, well, because we know the administrator doesn't have a background in construction or engineering, but all those are reviewed by the engineer on site prior to that, and the authorization comes on, director level, review and concurrence, that's not sufficient?
No, that's not sufficient. Not to
Is
spend
it-
that kind of money without public discussion or council approval.
Even if it's under the budgeted amount in the contract?
Yeah, even if it's under the budget amount. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Is your primary concern, and maybe it could be both, is the primary concern just the money being spent itself, or that the money isn't being spent on the appropriate applications? If we're gonna spend on that contingent, we have to spend $500,000. Do you feel like the council needs to be more involved with what exactly are we getting for that additional five? And again, I'm just trying to understand.
I want to understand, I think the council should be involved in those level of spending discussions, and the public needs to know why, there needs to be some openness to the public with this. It's, like I said, we could end up spending $1 million in change orders if the project was big enough, and there would be no discussion, and the public would have no knowledge of it until we get the bill.
So is your ask
This
there,
seems wrong.
is your ask there to be a cap on how much can be approved, or just, is it the $100,000 per change order, or is it like a maximum amount? You don't wanna see anything more than 100,000 approved by the city manager in total per project?
I would be agreeable to a cap total per project in change
Okay.
orders, but not at $100,000.
Right.
I would be, like, we have other caps, the city administrator can, authorize spend up to $15,000 on things without coming back to the council. I realize we have to have a process for running day to day, but millions of dollars without any discussion or approval just seems to rub me the wrong way.
Sure.
From an engineering perspective, and Jack, maybe this is for you and the engineer, sorry, Jack, I should.
Where do you think you're going?
Yeah. With these change orders, is it usually pretty technical information where, the engineer's gonna know better than I, as a non-engineer council member would know?
A lot of times it's very construction related and very detail oriented, and yeah, there's a lot of trust that goes on in there. A lot of it's timing. The other reason to have an administrator type of authorization is to keep contractors moving and,
Yeah.
a timing mechanism.
Ideally not having projects
and
cost
most-
more because of,
Yeah, and sometimes you're
deadlines
getting
and
those
everything.
approvals and you can still bring it back to council at a later date, and pass it through the council, but getting that direction out into the field on a timely basis is pretty
Yeah.
important.
I mean, part of my contention is that we have professional engineers that have a code of conduct that they need to perform. So I'm really not that concerned about, change orders not getting the full, view and review from our engineering staff and making educated decisions on that in the field based on if we have contingency in there, if it's covered. A lot of the projects that I've seen actually come in under budget where we're not even using the contingency that's available at times, and that leads to good management in the field. The other thing is, I wanna be careful with how many change orders come to council. There are timelines, and when we have a construction season that is essentially from April to November, when the daylight's on, you need to be able to keep that machine moving. And if the contractor's on hold on a change order and we don't meet for 2 weeks, we'd have to have a special meeting just for review of a change order. That has I have some concerns about how often that happens, and at what level. I've heard that Councilmember Jack says she has a problem with $100,000. I haven't heard what do you think is acceptable?
Well, I'm open to that. 25, 50 at max, total in a project?
Councilmember Holtz.
I mean, so yeah, we did have the conversation, and it went exactly like this. It was about the threshold, is the threshold an amount, or is a threshold only when it's over what we budgeted? And that, as I recall, we overall said, with not full agreement, but we overall said the threshold should be, we care as a council when the change order puts you over the budget, because we already allocated that budget. I don't support going down to that threshold. I fully support the concept that the public needs to know, and they do. Not everything goes through a formal council vote as the way of, we have stuff in our packets, we have our financials. The things are known. I do not see a value gain for me as a resident or a council member for change orders at a $25 or a $40 or a $50,000 threshold. When it's within the budget, when it goes through the licensed professionals who have ethical and legal obligations to go through it, and they're doing their due diligence through our staff to an administrator that I have full confidence in being an administrator, not an engineer, that then I would have a need to have a special meeting to review it. To me, there is no value gain in that process. I care about process efficiency as much as the transparency standpoint. I don't disagree, again, with the concept. It's about where do you draw the line? And I think the line is appropriate here. It is, we care when it is now becoming over budget. I have full confidence in our administrator and our city staff and our engineering staff. And maybe this is just an issue where we might not agree as to where to draw that line, but that's where I draw the line.
Based on that logic, once we adopt the budget, why do they have to come back to us for any approval?
Well,
I mean, it's in the budget. We budget $1 million for a fire truck. Fire chief ought to just be able to go and spend it because it's in the budget. That logic just falls apart.
I don't see that it does.
But usually when we're approving these projects, we have a pretty thorough detail of what that project entails. You know, and same thing, and so I'll just say this, I agree with your concern and the premise of, I'd prefer this to be more transparent of what's going on for those individuals as well. Now trying to balance that with, we need to keep the project moving. I guess where I'm leaning towards this is, I don't think I'd rather not change the change order amount. I'd rather come with maybe a little bit of a stricter pen when we get to what is the contingency amount on these projects of what we're gonna allow. So then if it does exceed that amount, then it does need to come back. And so that's where we're getting involved as a council versus if it's the middle of the project and a change order needs to occur. I understand those concerns if we need to keep the project moving so this doesn't become more expensive. $1 million project, 10% contingency seems to be pretty typical for what I see on most of our projects, correct? For a contingency, so I mean, that puts us at that $100,000 mark on $1 million project. If we're talking about a $500,000 project with a 10% contingency, all right, now we're talking about a $50,000 change order, anything above that, it would still have to come back to us.
What about a $50 million project? We have one in our CIP.
And so this is where I don't disagree. Then on a project like that, instead of saying a 10% contingency, I think as a council, we have to make that argument of, we want more oversight over this project because a 10% on a $50 million project is too much for us. We're gonna put a 5% contingency on it. We're gonna put a 2% contingency. I'm just saying that's where I prefer to put the checks and balances from my
Well,
perspective.
This concept of, we have to get this change approved, because the whole project's gonna come to a stop and cost us more money. How many times does that actually happen on a project? I've been in this game too, and I can never once recall that I had a change order that if we didn't get this approved in the next 24 or 48 hours, we're gonna incur additional costs.
Well,
When I worked for
typically-
Spokane, we had a $500 million budget and $300 million construction going on, and I never ran into these problems.
We never had a
Everyone.
change order for $1 million. Never had this type of change orders that's a hypothetical.
But it's a
as well.
$100,000 change order, it can
Hang
be
on,
cumulative.
I've got a question. In our contract language, Jack, I think there is a time frame in which when the contractor requests a change order has to be submitted and returned within a certain time frame. Does it not?
They have to, yeah, I mean, if they identify a change, they
They
have 30
identify the
days to
change
submit
order.
their request.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's timeframes for that.
We also have work order issues where you do
Work
have to
orders.
direct the contractor on the spot,
Yes.
which does cost you money, and then the change order comes at a later date. So
Yeah.
sometimes the things that are coming before council have already happened in the field, and
Yes,
you owe the contractor that money.
yes, exactly.
I'll-
I just don't, I don't know that, I guess I haven't typically dealt with city-sized projects. I've dealt with larger projects in which you have to make decisions on change orders in a timely fashion, or it could make a larger snafu when you're talking about concrete pours and things and like that. You're running into weather delays or things of that nature. So, I guess, again, I'll just point, the thing that I hear that is important is the transparency of making sure that people understand what a change order is for. To my knowledge, when I've seen change orders before, they do come in the consent agenda, as I've seen those, correct?
Yeah, unless there's a unique circumstance or a change of scope.
Right.
If we're proposing to change the scope, we'll
We're
come
changing
on the
a
regular
certain
agenda.
type of a valve that's more expensive, a pressure reducing valve or something like that, or we have to have two of them instead of one that was engineered in, correct?
Right.
Okay.
To change it here a little bit, if that's right. Just to go back to my questions and, about the budget amendments themselves. When I was talking to staff earlier on this, I just want to be clear that when I was originally bringing this up about, with the line items specifically, again, I think this is a great compromise. I agree with some of those points that, trying to manage the line items, could be very tricky. I don't know if I love the idea that might lead to, over budgeting or over predicting on those. I didn't love hearing that, but I guess I can understand how that might be an issue with it. But I do think it's a fair compromise where if we just look at it from a departmental budget standpoint, if we go over that budget amount, that's where we come back to the budget amendment for this. I think it's important. Again, this kind of goes back to what the discussion we're just having, where, this is something that city council, through the budget, we do set a lot of our priorities. We're setting a lot of direction with that. So I do want to really honor that document. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be amended. It doesn't mean it has to be perfect. It doesn't mean that we're, or at least from my standpoint, that we're trying to really over manage every single expense. But I do want it to be a tool that encourages our staff, if we're getting close to that point, to think outside the box, think, is this something that can be pushed to a later year? Is there a better, more efficient way we can go about doing this? Just like any other business would have to do, versus just saying, hey, we're gonna take this now from the general fund. And I know that's what's happened previously from, again, my discussion with staff, is on those department budgets where we've went over budget in the previous years. We've had excess revenues in those years. We've been able to draw from that, which is great. I don't want to rely on that. Again, I'd rather have us be challenged a little bit more to make sure we're making as accurate predictions as possible. If we're going above those predictions, then giving every effort we can to come up with alternatives, decide if it's really something that's necessary this year, or can it be pushed off to next year? And if it absolutely can't, then that should be brought to council, and it should be explained, we tried X, Y, and Z. This is why it's essential that we do it this year, not next year. So I'm fine with that, and I just want to be clear that it's not the intent of, I don't trust the staff with their budgets, or if they feel like they need to go over. Again, I think it just goes back to, we set that direction, and I want to make sure that we have some accountability to that direction.
Mayor, what if we compromise on this change order thing and say change orders can't exceed the maximum of $100,000 or 10% of the project cost with approval of the city council? So if we had a $3 million project, we got, administrator could approve, change it up to $100,000. If we had a $50,000 project, it would be $5,000. So it'd be 10% not to exceed $100,000. The lesser of.
Well, I think, again, our budget, well, a $50,000 budget with contingency wouldn't have more than $55,000 budget. So in the case of a $100,000 change order, it would come to council.
Right.
So I think that's the way it's laid out, the way I read it now. I have a thought on the department budgets. I'm going to say something that might catch some people off guard, but just hear me out. Because I've worked in state, I've worked in state government, I worked in county government. I think sometimes government budgets governments can be inherently wasteful when the trust is not given to the people that manage those budgets. In other words, I'll say this. Let's say Director X puts in the budget for $5,000 for computer hardware in 2025, right? And she has a council that has been pretty hard on budgets before, and she's getting towards the end of the year. It's getting to be November. And she says, well, I haven't really spent that money. I don't really need to, but I know that if I don't spend it and I ask for it next year, I didn't spend it, I'm not gonna get it. So I'm gonna spend it just because I need to show that cost that I met my budget, right? That I used the budget they gave me to spend. And I think oftentimes, at least some experience where I saw there was some inherent waste just trying to use the budget so that when they went to ask for the budget the next time, somebody didn't say, well, you never used the budget, so we're just gonna take that away, you don't need it. I think the encouragement is to, just like hopefully most of us do with our budgets at home, we say, well, I don't really need to spend that money, even though I had it budgeted. I can tuck it away for a rainy day fund when my roof does need help, and I can save that. So I guess to that extent, I think that when we've had assistance when I think Chief Kalis came to us, he was asking for going over the budget for capital expenditure, presented that as, I'm gonna buy it now. If the money wasn't in our budget this year, it'll be next year, but if I buy it next year, it's gonna cost us an extra $60,000. So I'd like to encourage that line of thinking with our directors and give them that flexibility to do that within the realms of what we have for a budget. And bring those items when, as you said, Councilmember Hearn, hey, we've tried different things to move things around. We're in a bind, we need this now, or our water system's gonna fall down, or our sewer system's gonna fall down, or, this road's in really bad disrepair. We've had multiple water main failures or things of that nature. Those are the things, as a council, we should be concerned on. And there's not to say that the councils, we have directors with their expertise in their certain areas, because at any given time, councils don't necessarily have that experience. Here we have, a couple engineers that like to expound about their experience or whatnot.
Oh, we know.
And but the reality is, that's not always gonna be the case. So we need to try and have systems in place that let the staff that are hopefully here the long term to make investments in them with the training and things like that, so that they can prepare their budgets appropriately and then carry those out throughout the year and put the city in a better financial spot.
Mayor, I agree with you completely, and I think the budget really is our best guess.
Yes.
It's not etched in stone, and I think the concern is, well, at what point, if we're gonna exceed the budget, should the council make a budget adjustment? I don't want us to make budget adjustments at every meeting. I'd be just fine with, making a budget adjustment at maybe at 6 months and 12 months.
And we really don't, honestly, I don't know that we get that a whole lot. For the most part, things have been in line, and the staff that we have make a really concerted effort to use that judiciously. So for my part, I understand, I'm not so concerned with the amount because we do have budget sets for capital projects. We do have engineers that oversee those, project managers, inspectors that do that are professional at it. I do get your point on the transparency level. So with that, I mean, I personally, I'm good with the policy change as you have done on this one. I'm okay with it. But if there was some, if we could get some thoughts on, if there is a large change order for something, maybe how we let that be known to people that are interested in it. And, you know, I'm gonna be really honest with you, there's a very small percentage of the people in this city that really pay attention to what's going on overall with city projects. They just want them to be done so they can get on them and start driving again or using their water again or whatever. But that would be the one thing I can take out of this discussion that I think maybe could use some highlight.
Well, I think if we're assessing them for 'em, that street project, they're going to be very concerned about the amount of the change orders.
Right. Again, I have not seen a city project that's come in over. Usually when we approve them at the end, there's still, their assessed value, their assessed cost is reduced from, again, it can't go up from what the original assessment was. It can only go down. And I think, I could be wrong, I don't want to put a number to it, but typically it feels like it's less than the, the feasibility study shows.
Correct.
Yeah,
And so if it did go over, it would just be 100% the city's responsibility.
it would be, yes.
Or say, when I say the city's, it would have to come from the general fund.
Our fund, yes.
Yes.
And
Which
it's
is the
never-
taxpayers' money.
But again, I mean, I'd like to throw a number at it, but I don't want to, because I'd probably be wrong. But I think it's very, I can't, in my memory, recall a time that happening.
It has.
Well, I mean, in the
Yeah.
6 years I've been here,
We-
I don't recall it.
Yeah, in general, we're doing a pretty good job, but there's things that happen.
There are.
But yeah, and in particular in the assessment projects, there's always a final assessment hearing and a detailed presentation of that budget. So if that
Yep.
project did go over, you're seeing that increased cost to the city line item
Yep.
in that presentation. And as the mayor said, the assessment's not going up, the city cost is going up at that point.
But it's typically within the budget or the contingency amount.
Yeah, it's usually, yeah. The problem is you're comparing it to feasibility before design, so
Correct.
sometimes that gets, it's a little different.
Right.
Sometimes you already know you're going over by the time you're done designing it, that you,
I've spoken enough.
Correct me
Okay.
if I'm wrong, wasn't a part of the change order discussion also that sometimes a change order is something we have no control over because it's a county project? And we just simply have to sign off on it, like say, this was part of our discussion, as I recall.
That is true.
Like say with Lake Elmo and 36, we literally have no choice in the matter and the change order needs to occur, period.
you won't see the change orders for approval, you just get invoiced.
The
your-
change order.
Your share of that cost.
Yeah.
So in this case, it's not even applicable because it's not a change order. All right.
And again, that project is overseen by their project engineers, their inspectors that are out there working at the behest on the county. And the county certainly does its best job to make sure that everything is accounted for appropriately. Did you want to say something, Councilman?
Yeah, switching back again, so just, I don't know if I completely followed what you were saying about the department budgets. I thought it was going one direction, then I thought it went the other. So I just wanna confirm that you are comfortable with how it's written in here as far as if it does go over the budget for the department, that is something that we do wanna look at as a council?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean.
Holding on bracing.
I'm comfortable with how it's written as well. I think I have trust in our licensed professionals and engineers and our staff. I don't wanna create more red tape and more steps cause even if it got past Nicole to me, I'm not an engineer. She would have just as much of an idea of what I'm looking at. I would go to you, Jack, and be like, what am I looking at here? Should we approve this? And I'd use your expertise for this. So I'm okay with how this is written. I don't have anything else to add from what else has been said between the mayor and everybody else here.
All right.
Well, I'll respect the difference of opinion. I just go on and say, I think authorizing an appointed official to be able to spend $1 million of public money without any public discussion, without any council approval, is a dereliction of our duty, and I'll let it die at that. I'm gonna vote no on this policy.
I think there are guardrails on that, that are in there for budgetary reasons. Where is that motion?
It was already made.
Yeah, I know. All right, I'm gonna call a question on the motion to adopt revisions of the City of Lake Elmo purchasing policy. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
All right, passes 4-1. Next on our docket is High Point Crossing Final Plat. Mr. Fuerst.
All right, good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Bring up this presentation for you here. So hopefully I can knock off not only this item, but the next one on your agenda. With this presentation, should be pretty short. So the city's received the final plat application for High Point Crossing. You will remember this project, having recently approved the preliminary plat and some variances. So the subject property, as you well know, located just on Inwood Avenue, just under 80 acres. We have an 18-unit rural residential subdivision. This would be served by city water and individual septic treatment systems. And so we're looking at a final plat and development agreement this evening. Here's the project plan that came in with the final plat and plans. Generally consistent with the preliminary plat as it has been approved based on I should say revised based on the city's conditional approval. Final plat is included in your packet as well, so that's broken out into several insets. I've kind of arranged them on the screen here. Generally, again, this is consistent with the conditionally approved preliminary plat. As a refresher, the city also did approve 3 different variances for the development, one to front yard setbacks, another to the number of trees to be planted per lot, and that sidewalk requirement as the abutting streets do not have a sidewalk. The city staff has reviewed the final plat. This is really that kind of dotting of i's, crossing of t's, making sure that the plans are meeting those conditions of the city's approval. So the city's fire team has reviewed the plans. Valley Branch Water District has issued a permit for the project. The city's landscape architect and city engineer have reviewed the plans. There are memos from the city's landscape architect and city engineering team that will require certain, I would say, minor revisions in some cases to the plans as we move forward. In the staff report, we have proposed findings that would approve the final plat because it's consistent with what the city's previously approved. We also have 14 conditions of approval. These are largely standard conditions, things like conformance with the engineering and landscape architect memos, making sure that various agreements, fees, etc., are either entered into or paid. And then we have certain, I would call them unique conditions here, one requiring wetland buffer signage and another requiring that the city review the power line corridor easement for those terms and conditions that Excel would apply to the city infrastructure in the area. So that brings me to the recommendations. We've got one recommended motion for approval of the resolution that would approve the final plat, And then another for the development agreement, that would be a resolution to approve that. The development agreement, this is in the city's standard template, is drafted by the city attorney and development review team. And really, there have been very minimal changes to that standard template, really to fit the context of this particular project. So with all of that said, happy to stand for questions. Paul with Rachel Development is here if you have any questions for him as well. So,
Any questions from council? Any questions for the developer? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to adopt resolution 2026-048, approving the final plat for High Point Crossing requested by Rachel Development on the subject property based on the findings of fact and conditions therein.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Hearn, a second by Councilmember Cragness. Discussion. Councilmember Hearn.
This is, I think this has been my favorite development to provide the final approval for here. But in all seriousness, thank you for the resilience working through this. Again, this actually has been, I think, a really good process. I think it was I believe it was the major driving force behind our OPPUD discussion. I think this is gonna be a beautiful development. I think it's gonna show other landowners, other developers that this type of development is possible. And that really excites me for Lake Elmo, that we can do a development like this. And I hope others see it, and I hope there's more of them in the future. And you've been very pleasant to work with. I know we've had a lot of things that have had to work through and things that didn't quite go your way, and you've been very positive throughout it, always working with the city to figure out how to move forward, and I'm just really appreciative of that.
Any other discussion? If not, I'll call the question. On the motion to adopt resolution 2026-048, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Resolution is adopted.
Move to adopt resolution 2026-049, approving the development agreement for High Point Crossing based on the findings of fact and conditions therein.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor to adopt resolution 2026-049, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Resolution is adopted. Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. All right. Number 5, mayor and council member salaries.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. City Code states that mayor and council members shall be paid salaries as determined from time to time. The last time that was reviewed was 13 years ago with an effective date of 1/1/2013. At the June 9th council workshop, council reviewed information on council salaries from neighboring communities and communities of similar sizes. Before you is the ordinance 2026-08, which includes a salary increase effective 1/1/2027 and language to include an annual cost of living increase starting 1/1/2028 that reflects the discussion at the 6/9 workshop.
Questions for Ms. Doyle? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to adopt ordinance 2026-08, setting the salaries of the mayor and council.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Holtz, second by Councilmember Hearn. Discussion. Councilmember Holtz.
Appreciate the discussion we had on this at the workshop. It is, long-term wise, short-term wise, it was something that was necessary. I don't think it's gonna change, obviously, any of our lifestyles, right? That's not what this is about. This is about making sure that adjustments are made that are reflective of the work that we expect from each one of us, but also the work we expect from those who come after. And that, to me, is gonna be the more important thing. There's gonna be a time not too shortly when all of us are gone. And I wanna make sure that we're setting up a place where it's setting up a place where they are almost earning what they deserve. And this still is not it, and it never will be, right? Elected serve, it never
not
will
meant
be.
to.
Yeah, it's not meant to. We do salaries for our staff. You all are the ones who manage the city. We are here as residents who try to give the guidance and the direction, but, you know, yeah, I don't have any, that's that.
Councilmember Hearn.
Originally, I was against this. I was more in favor of, I don't think it's necessary, you know, we're doing this from more of a volunteer standpoint. This was brought up at the discussion, I think by Mayor, you brought this up, that, you know, one of the things to think about is, if we don't have a reasonable salary that's provided for this, that might really be prohibitive to certain individuals. And I did some digging on that, and, you know, give yourself a little pat on the back. A lot of the founding fathers, that was the reason that they, you know, looked for paying salaries for government in the first place. And I think that's a very valid point. Again, you know, is this the most ideal paying job if you're looking for an extra job? No. But at the same time, if you have an opinion and you want to be involved in the city, it shouldn't be prohibitive of spending your time, because it is a lot of hours out of the week, out of the month, out of the years. And so from that standpoint, I did change my mind, and I think this is fair, you know, and honestly, after kind of looking at that from that perspective, it is something that I think we need to be more consistently looking at and making sure that we're staying on top of, rather than every 13 years. So thank you, Mayor, for bringing this up. I know it's always a tough one to bring up, because you don't want to appear that you're asking for something that, I understand the concern of not wanting to appear like we're asking for more, but from that standpoint of, it makes it more accessible of an option for somebody who maybe isn't in a position otherwise to do this from a financial standpoint. It makes it more of a reasonable decision for them. So I have changed my mind. I'm in favor of this.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I like the most out of this as well is the the cost of living adjustment included as well. So we don't have to wait 13 years to have a quote-unquote awkward discussion about how much we should be paid. It'll just annually go up, and hopefully won't have to be addressed in the future because of that. So I like it.
All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor of adopting ordinance 2026-08, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Ordinance 2026-08 is adopted. Thank you. Mr. Griffin, engineering services for South Water Treatment Plant.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Tonight's item is just for discussion. There's no action items being requested, but been some changes with the engineering personnel that's been working for the city, so I wanted to get before the council and give you an update on where things are at, and my recommendations of where I think what's in the best interest of the city. So just to give you some background, going back, we have SEH as your water modeling engineer. They did the water tower design, so they've done a lot of the distribution system engineering, and they're our go-to for that. And we're at a time when we weren't doing treatment in town, and when the PFAS issue came up, and then we started having to look at water treatment plants, we started to look for the best expert in the best interest of the city for that. And we turned to Stantec. And so Stantec, we retained Stantec in 2023 for 2 projects. The well number 2 water treatment plant, which was a fast track project, get that well up and running. Quasi-temporary treatment facility, and then we were pivoting and starting to look at the South Water Treatment Plant as well. We chose Stantec at the time because of their experience in Cottage Grove. They've been doing all the work in Cottage Grove. They've done multiple temporary treatment plants on a fast track basis there, and they've been doing the permanent water treatment plants there as well. The other engineering firm that's in the East Metro is AE2S, who's done the work for Woodbury. So there was Stantec and AE2S. So we're not looking at what I would say just there's a lot of firms that provide water treatment expertise. What we were looking at that time is someone who had specific expertise with PFAS and experience with PFAS, and more particularly experience in the East Metro working with the 3M settlement funds, because there's a lot of nuances about what's grant eligible, and everything you recommend, you have to get the buy-in from the MPCA and the co-trustees on what you're proposing. So having those interactions and knowing those relationships were pretty important. So we brought Stantec on to do those projects. Your well number 2 project is completed and that contract's been closed out. The South Water Treatment Plant project, we are just wrapping up preliminary design. So we did a preliminary design, footprint of what the water treatment plant building would consist of, and we looked at the site, geotechnical engineering, wetland delineation, everything it takes, and then we did a test well to verify that the site works. We've just recently received a memo from Stantec saying that the site works for what we're trying to do, that basically the go ahead to begin acquiring the site. We're still waiting on the final test results, which would be PFAS and iron and manganese are the critical ones. And we have to get those results, and then a memo has to be drawn up of what we actually are recommending for treatment. So the actual treatment plant, while we have a footprint laid out, we're not exactly sure what goes in there yet until we have that chemistry. We have to determine whether it's going to have pre-treatment or not, which is a big debate with 3M and big debate with the co-trustees of whether that's grant eligible. It's a big deal to the city from the standpoint that if you can do pre-treatment and get that into your capital costs, your O&M goes way down. And we all know that the O&M costs are likely to be paid by the city, the capital costs are not. So you want somebody on your side going to bat for you in those negotiations of whether pre-treatment is going to really be required and beneficial. And then there's the whether we go with IX or go with GAC. So there's a couple different decisions that need to be made that we have yet to do right now. So we've been working on that, and I just learned a couple weeks ago that Bolton and Mink hired the 2 project managers, or the key project manager, and then his right-hand man. And so one started June 22nd, one started June 29th. This is all coming very quickly. So now Bolton and Mink has those expertise. I have yet to be contacted by Stantec with anybody else that they have to backfill. I know they have plenty of water system experts around the world. I don't know that they have anybody else that's worked in the East Metro area and has that experience. And so, I wanted to get in front of the council because I didn't like the optics of this, but I do think it's in the city's best interest to retain these 2 individuals, which would be moving the remaining portion of this contract over to Bolton and Mink to wrap this up. And the next phase, because really the next step is to get those water test results, make those final recommendations of what that treatment plant needs to be, and now start a series of negotiations with 3M and MPCA to get their buy-in and approval of what that treatment facility would be. And then we move to final design, and we start to do the final design of that project. So that's where we're at in the project. And so the money is grant funded. We have about $60,000 left in the preliminary design budget. From that grant, we won't use all of that by any means to get to design, but the way that works is they'll just keep using that money into final design too. So the city will have a grant agreement that will just continue to use that budget, and that budget will get added onto once the scope of the treatment plant's been done and we have final design services, then we'll do an amendment for that grant to increase that budget and then begin the final design. Meanwhile, we gotta acquire the site, and so that's the other thing that I'll be working on myself, so. So I wanted to get this in front of the council and let you know that this is where things are at. That's, my recommendations are to not lose time, to not lose anything, is just to move that work over to Bolton and Mink to finish that preliminary design scope and get that buy-in from the MPCA and co-trustees. So I'll stop there and.
Any questions for Jack? Councilmember Dragisich.
Couple of questions. Do the former Stantec employees have any legal restrictions from their employment with Stantec that will prevent them from being fully engaged on the project as Bolton and Mink employees?
As I understand it, they have something. I have not seen it, I don't know. I didn't want to dig too far into that until I got in front of you and found and verified this direction. I do know Cottage Grove has already made the decision to move over to Bolton and Mink, and they wrote a letter to Stantec and requested that they use those, and Stantec agreed to it. So I know they did that step. Don't know exactly what that looked like yet.
Okay. Do we have a current contract with Stantec we would have to terminate?
They've actually kind of wrapped it up and finalized it. I have emails from their staff basically indicating as soon as they send over the test results, they'll send the final invoice. So we're closing out with them.
So the design, the future design is not under contract with them?
There's no contract for that, no.
Okay, thank you.
I am still considering using them for drilling of well 6. They did the test well, and, you know, that's a different thing, so there's still some work we might use them for.
Thank, those are the two questions I had.
Anyone else? Thanks for bringing that to our attention. I get it, happens in the industry. Thank you.
Thanks.
Stormwater Utility Code Review. Mr. Stanley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. With me tonight is Tim Olson. He's going to assist in this presentation. Tim is a principal engineer in our Water Resources Group, and he and his staff did a lot of the technical analysis and review here too. So I'm going to kind of kick things off and turn it over to Tim, and then I'm going to jump back in. So as Council recalls, we were asked to look into doing an equity review on the stormwater utility ordinance earlier this year. And so what I have is a presentation summarizing the memo that we put together here. And some of the items we're going to talk about tonight are a summary of the existing ordinance, an assessment of the current methodology that exists in the ordinance, options for changes or options for various utility charges. The stormwater utility fee appeal process was also asked to be reviewed, so I've done some research on that. Also, a stormwater maintenance agreement in homeowners associations where there may be overlapping or misalignment between public maintenance and something that this homeowners association is being asked to do was looked at. We have some findings and some recommendations after discussion with staff, and then we have some questions for council. So just to kind of kick off a summary of the ordinance here, there's a Minnesota statute 444.075 provides guidance for municipalities to develop a stormwater utility ordinance. And it, you know, has things in there like the funding collected through this ordinance is for, is dedicated for maintenance and improvement of the stormwater system. There's an existing rate methodology that provides the base rate for residential properties that is determined by cities. Ours uses utility factors across different property types and land uses. Our ordinance also allows for appeal of the fee, and there are specified fee reductions for residents who install stormwater BMPs currently. There's also exemptions within the ordinance that are specified, such as right-of-way areas, public parks, lakes, and railroad property. Pardon me. So just to kind of get into the assessment of the current methodology, I'm gonna just kind of go through this quick and then I'm gonna turn it over to Tim. But the current methodology is based on assigning like a residential, one residential unit is one residential unit regardless of size or zoning or land use. And that is consistent with many other communities. And I'll get into this a little later, but I did do a lot of research when it came to looking at what other communities are doing in the area, not just East Metro, but ones of comparable size. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the existing structure is, straightforward. It's widely accepted. It's administratively, it's administratively and legally defensible, and it can be considered generally fair. And again, Lake Elmo has a very wide array of residential, single-family housing types in several zoning districts, so it can be difficult to group them all into one category. But a lot of the other cities I looked at also fall into that same situation. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tim. Tim's going to kind of go through some additional points on the methodology and talk about some of the technical details of the report.
Yeah, thanks, Nate, and good evening, Mayor and Council. As Nate had mentioned, your current ordinance, the way that it's structured, it really is pretty widely accepted and defensible. But as we dug deeper into that program, we just uncovered a few items for discussion here for sure. The current program uses a comparison of residential values to other land use types. This is pretty standard across the board. We'll talk a little bit more about some other options here coming up, but the one thing that we noticed that our residential properties are considered a single unit regardless of their lot size and land use classification. There are a pretty wide array of not only land uses but residential land use types in the city of Lake Elmo, and those land use categories don't always match directly with the ordinance. That can maybe pose a challenge or some potential lack of transparency. This table just summarizes directly from the ordinance how the current utility charge is set up, the varying land uses that are currently utilized within the ordinance. So we'll keep going here. We looked at a couple of things. We looked at this curve number methodology, which I'll talk about here now, and then looking at some direct calculations of impervious values. Curve numbers are used in stormwater modeling to really represent a land use and a soil type. We use that single value then to calculate runoff potential. So after the water falls on the land and it runs off, how much of that water actually runs off. So we use a curve number as a surrogate to describe those things. A good example here is that a parking lot might have a curve number of 95, which would indicate higher amounts of runoff. An open meadow might have a curve number of 50, which would indicate more infiltration into the soil and therefore lower runoff value. In looking at the standard impervious values that are defined nationally and probably internationally for curve numbers, we can look at a ratio of those impervious values to a standard, say, medium density residential value. In this assessment, the ratio of the residential impervious to other land uses actually does align quite well with your current utility factor. They're not exact. Again, these land use categories can be widely variable in how much impervious they have. But in this minor assessment of some of these standard practice values, at least those utility factors were within range. Okay. We did took a similar approach with directly calculating impervious values for a variety of land uses. This is pretty standard practice too when it comes to other options for how stormwater utilities might be structured. So we used some GIS and did some spot checks. I think it's important here to note that this wasn't necessarily meant to be a representative sample across the entire community, but rather just to look at a few example land uses, calculate those ratios, and double check against the utility factor. The next series of slides just show what that assessment looked like. These are commercial industrial properties here. There are actually, I believe, 4 parcels on this page. But you can kind of see how the impervious density might change on a parcel-to-parcel basis, even when those land uses are really close to one another. This would be an example of an institutional property. We see this pretty typical, high values of impervious surface, but also coupled with a pretty high value or a high density of non-impervious surface or permeable surface. We start to look at residential. I think this is where the complexities start to expose themselves a little bit here. This is an example of a low-density residential parcel here, 2.5 acres. These low-density residential parcels in Lake Elmo have shown to have higher values of impervious coverage, but their percent impervious might be low, generally based on the size of the lot. Here's another example of that same condition where you have a 1 acre lot versus a 1/4 acre lot, and you can really visually see here how those impervious densities change. And then finally, in a high density residential, attached townhome condition like this, you're almost purely impervious. And so how do those factors, change, as you calculate those new utility factor rates? Okay. To summarize that impervious area calculation, we again looked at percent impervious of those lots. You can kind of see here the land uses that we chose to measure and how many of those parcels were measured. And again, when we calculate the ratio of impervious percentage per lot, we can get pretty close to the current utility factor table. So that was another validation point here, looking at impervious as a surrogate for what those utility factors might be, seems to align with the current methodology. So I want to talk a little bit about some options to build in some more transparency and equity into the current system based on the number of land uses that Lake Elmo has. We do believe that there are some opportunities to improve the proportionality within the stormwater utility rate structure currently. Each one of these systems does take some time, and some ongoing maintenance to keep those systems in place. And so we'll talk about that here. But one methodology is called the residential equivalency factor. It's very similar to what you have now. This would be an expansion of a similar structure. So we're directly measuring impervious surface from a sample set of different land uses. We would want to try and cover as many of the land uses or all of the land uses defined in the comprehensive plan or within your ordinance itself. And then the residential equivalency factor is based on a ratio amongst those land uses. So again, very similar to the current system, just an expansion into some additional land uses. A high-level estimate to complete a study like this would be in the $25,000 to $35,000 range and take a few months to complete. Let's look at those numbers and just in terms of scale in these next couple of options here too. This direct impervious area method is one of the more complex options available. This would physically measure impervious surface on every single parcel in town, both residential and non-residential parcels. It's not based on any ratio to those residential parcels, but rather you charge a rate based on the amount of impervious that's on site. Then again, that impervious can be correlated almost directly to the amount of runoff or stormwater that has to be managed in the system. So this is a more complex approach. It would require a lot more maintenance to long-term. Anytime you have a new construction on any parcel, you have to measure the impervious on that and track it and store it in your database. So a little more expensive to generate a database of this size and a little longer to do so. Okay. Finally, the equivalent residential unit is really one that I've seen probably the most. In this case, we directly measure impervious in all non-residential parcels. You do a collective sample of all residential parcels to create what one ERU value would be. So if you measure 100 residential parcels and the average impervious surface is 3,000 square feet, that represents one residential equivalent unit, and then everything else is based on a factor of that. So all residential parcels have an ERU of 1, and then everything else is a multiple of that based on the amount of impervious. Hopefully that was clear. But this is sort of a mid-level assessment in terms of time and time to produce and cost to produce. It's really, again, one of the more widely used methodologies out there, I think. This one does take a little more maintenance as well. So if we summarize all three of those, and I apologize for how red that red really is, it's not meant to elicit danger, but rather just that it's maybe the more challenging of the options. So think of that as kind of a 3-2-1 situation. But The direct impervious method, more time to create, more cost to create, and more cost to maintain long-term. However, it's the most accurate, it's a direct measurement, it's the easiest to defend, and likely the most equitable. The ERU methodology kind of runs right through the middle, and then that REF, which I think is a good methodology, you know, is a little less time to create that, less time to maintain it, but the accuracy starts to go down, the defensibility starts to go down a little bit, and so does the equity. Okay. All right, I'll turn it back over to Nate.
Thanks, Tim. So, once we had a draft of the reports, we sat down with city staff to talk because, you know, while we're presenting some findings here, that's really what we were presenting, you know, and we wanted to talk to staff and drill down and see what direction we wanted to take, you know. We just presented some potential expenditures, really, for the city. And do we feel that that's necessary right now, you know? Where we feel that we have an existing structure that's generally equitable, you know, and generally fair. It's been in place for a while. It comes from a straightforward and widely accepted place, and it's administratively defensible. So after discussion with staff, we actually have a recommendation from city staff that we'd like to maintain the current stormwater utility rate methodology as currently established in the ordinance. Pardon me. So I did a fair amount of research during this process on appeals process. And again, just to reiterate, the statute, Minnesota Statute 444.075 provides guidance to establish the stormwater ordinance, but there's no requirement in the statute that municipalities allow appeals or credits or anything like that. Obviously, you know, we know that we currently allow appeals, and then, you know, another point to consider is that a credit system, well, it can, you know, it can incentivize a property, but we don't have any teeth in the ordinance for it. So right now in the ordinance, you know, we say, you know, there's a review by the Public Works Director if somebody puts in a rain barrel or a rain garden, and they can potentially have a reduction in their fee. But we don't have any sort of annual inspection requirements. It's an ongoing credit. So does that maintained long term? Does that resident sell their home and somebody comes and fills in the rain garden? You know, we don't know, but that property would be on the books still getting a credit, you know. So widespread rebates actually could become detrimental from not just a revenue to the fund standpoint, but from, you know, kind of granted in error standpoint. So, you know, the question is, does the city want to maintain the, you know, existing appeal process, you know? And in my research, not all municipalities, they don't all entertain credits or reduction, especially when, you know, the fee is assigned on a unit basis, like we have in Lake Elmo, for a single family home anyways, you know. So there are opportunities, like I was kind of talking about earlier, to improve the program through clear application requirements, eligibility criteria, and guidance for determining fee reduction. Right now, it's a little squishy, you know, it's percentages, and, you know, we're not actually asking somebody to show the amount of runoff that they're taking off the city system, you know. And also, you know, it's important to consider staff time in this. You know, there's a companion memo to this one that is part of the item that's prepared by Director Hedler and Director Tholen, kind of detailing, you know, the existing credit process, how much we're currently taking off the books, and how many properties are getting in credit. So, so I'm gonna talk now a little bit about stormwater maintenance agreements and homeowners associations, which, you know, it's not necessarily part of the ordinance, but it was part of the review task. So I looked at, like I say, I suppose a dozen cities in the East Metro are of comparable size, and I didn't see anything regarding addressing, you know, this issue, You know, I guess I didn't really expect to, but I kind of verified it. There's no allowances for fee reductions or review mechanisms that I saw in any of the codes researched. And the other thing to note is, you know, Lake Elmo, we are a very unique community. You know, we have a wide variety of residential housing subdivision types, and the agreements are very tailored and individualized to the, you know, situations within those neighborhoods. So this makes developing like a credit system pretty difficult, and you know, I think it'd be difficult to administer as well. So, you know, stormwater maintenance agreements are a very effective tool for defining maintenance responsibilities, right? The agreements, again, are tailored, you know, to the developments, you know, but, you know, that kind of like says to me, well, if there is a problem, you know, we can't just lump them all together. This has to be done on a case-by-case review. If there's a neighborhood that thinks that they have an HOA that has a stormwater maintenance agreement that they feel is maybe misaligned or improperly assigning public, what would normally be public stormwater maintenance to the neighborhood. So I guess the best that we could come up with thinking about this is that if those situations exist, we would encourage the homeowners association to approach the city to see if some amendment, if there could be an amendment upon review of the agreement, you know, to kind of dig into the spirit of the agreement. What was the intent? You know, is it a preservation area? Is it flood storage? Is it, you know, a natural feature, you know, that's just been memorialized through this mechanism of a stormwater maintenance agreement that could maybe be another tool could be used in our toolbox. So to talk about, you know, just summarize some of the findings and conclusions of the review. You know, Lake Elmo has a vast array of different land use and property classifications, making it difficult to represent all single-family properties within one category. Currently, all single-family residential properties are charged as a single unit, which is a widely accepted approach to assigning stormwater utility fees. And I keep coming back to that because that's an important part of the ordinance. If you look at the statute, you know, 444.075, you know, it says in there, you know, that just equitable fees have to be assigned based on a widely accepted methodology. You know, that's part of that statute that our ordinance is based upon. Our ordinance currently uses utility factors to differentiate stormwater utility charges among non-residential land uses. The high-level review suggests that the existing UFs are reasonable, although a more data-driven methodology could further refine the calculations. So that's what Tim was talking about. While we do have a system that is equitable and generally fair, you know, greater transparency could be, you know, gained through some sort of a more data-driven approach. The city offers rebates through an appeals process. The system is maintained. Opportunities exist to improve the program through clear application requirements, eligibility criteria, and guidance for determining fee reductions. Again, I just kind of talked about this with the appeals process. You know, a lot of the language I saw in other ordinances, they weren't even as specific as what we have, saying, you know, a percentage range of reduction. It's either you can request the fee to be recalculated, or we'll take it under consideration, you know, and at the discretion of the director, you know. So to me, that's kind of problematic. It makes it very difficult for someone like Pete to, you know, process an appeal. Stormwater maintenance agreements are an effective tool for defining long-term maintenance responsibilities between the city and HOAs. Concerns regarding maintenance obligations are best addressed on a case-by-case review. Opportunities exist to improve proportionality within stormwater utility rate structure, but changes will require completion of a professional study, updates to the city's systems, and practices now and into the future. So, you know, like, this doesn't happen overnight. If council wanted to move forward, you know, with some sort of alternative or a new structure, you know, as you probably know, anytime you're making changes to a fee that, you know, folks got to pay, there could be some consternation, you know. So that, you know, there has to be a lot of, you know, legwork on the front end and justification, I think, to prevent, you know, a lot of folks from being really upset. So again, staff recommends maintaining the current stormwater utility rate methodology as established by the ordinance. The existing structure is straightforward, widely accepted, administratively defensible, and generally equitable. But we are looking for feedback from the council tonight regarding the current stormwater utility fee appeals process, and including whether the process should be maintained, modified, or even discontinued.
Questions for Mr. Swanson or Stanley? Cragness.
Yeah, so when you say it's generally equitable, what instances have you seen where it could be more equitable, or you've seen discrepancies, things like that?
So, and I'll let Tim, feel free to chime in anytime here, but we have a version, like Tim said, of a residential equivalency factor system. And when you get, when you get to those utility factors that spread across other property types, ours are different from Oakdale's, and they're different from Stillwater's, and they're different from Cottage Grove's by a little bit. You know what I mean? So that's where, I think there could be, but not by that much, you know what I mean? So when I say generally equitable, I think, what I'm saying is we're pretty much doing what others are doing. Mm-hmm. And based on our review of, how the impervious, particularly how the impervious surface measurements played out, we're seeing that there's some general alignment with those numbers that are being used.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Dragisich.
I started this discussion, and I have some thoughts and comments. I spent a good deal of time reviewing your memo and a bunch of other information that, that I have or have researched. We show a residential parcel, you show a high density of 4,519 square feet. And you show the low density at 11,400 some square feet. So, but they both pay the same fee. That's not equity in my mind. And I took a look in the downtown Old Village part and said, well, how do those parcels compare to our residential parcels? And so, looking at from the county maps and that, and I have a list of them, but one of them is about 12, almost 13,000 square feet of parcel, 100% impervious. And under our current ordinance, that parcel pays $94.23 in stormwater fees for 13,000 impervious square feet. Our homeowner at 4,500 square feet pays $103. That's not equity by any shape or imagination. I just did a calculation, if you had a 100% impervious lot, it'd have to have about 14,000 square feet of area to pay the same as that 4,000 square foot, 4,500 square foot of residential. In my mind, that's not equitable. I know that, the residential equivalent and those things are used in a lot of places, and that's true. But that doesn't mean they're equitable. I look back, Black & Veatch does a utility survey study, or they used to every year. Their most recent study showed that about a third of the residential charge systems use either a tier or impervious area. So there is nationwide, there's a more trend towards using a tiered system or impervious area than there here is, in Lake Elmo. Other consultants that do that, Raf Tellis, it's a lot of stormwater studies. They speak at national conferences. They say a flat rate is easy to administer, while tiering introduces more equity by placing properties within a tier based on impervious area on the property. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, in their publication, Funding Stormwater Projects, says the same thing. A tiered flat rate structure approach improves the equitability of bills sent to homeowners. So there's two very large organizations that are putting them out there. With regard to the stormwater discounts, I asked the city staff to tell me how many discounts we have out there. We have 25 of them currently. Nobody knows why they were given or the reason behind them. And in fact, some of them in our stormwater ordinance is actually inconsistent with state law, and some of these variances may have been granted in violation of state law, but nobody knows. But we need to amend our ordinance to take out that inconsistency. But that's just a fact that's there, and I validated that inconsistency with the city attorney. The stormwater HOA ponds is just near and dear to my heart. Okay, so the developer comes in, we see this all the time. We're putting in a development, and the city tells him he must put in a stormwater pond. The water that goes to that stormwater pond is the same water that flows off of the residential units in the rest of the city. So if I live in a portion of the city without a stormwater pond, my stormwater runoff goes into the utility system, 100% paid for by the system as a whole. If I live in an HOA, part of the stormwater utility off of my lot and all of the runoff from streets goes into a stormwater pond that the city has told the developer he must install and that he must maintain. The developer doesn't care. He builds the cost into the cost of the lot, and he never pays the ongoing maintenance costs. My research and some other projects I've worked on, generally would tell me that the cost to the homeowners association for the maintenance of the pond and the replacement, you're required to set up a reserve fund under statute in the HOAs for all the assets you own, generally run in the area of $50 a year. So if I'm in an HOA, I'm paying $103,000 fee to the city, and I'm treating the same stormwater runoff, that other residences treat at another $50 for me. So I'm paying $153 a year because the city has forced that on me, and residents in non-HOAs are paying $103. And we call that equity. I'm sorry, that's not. Yeah, the homeowners could come in and say, we want you to take this over, or we want a discount or something. They haven't done it yet, but I certainly can rally them to do that because it's simply unfair that a HOA collects a portion of the same of stormwater runoff, same as the non-HOA properties, but gets stuck paying $50 more a year for stormwater costs, while the homeowner pays a portion of the stormwater costs for the non-HOA homeowners. That's just not a fair system by any stretch of the imagination. I think that we need to look at our system and address these inequities. I can go along with if the HOAs, believe that's not fair, they can come in. I'll pack the place with HOA representatives who are paying $50 a month, say, why are we getting stuck? Why do we have to pay a different stormwater system than the non-HOA members? That's the process. Okay, I'll go along with that. But the way our system is set up by the examples I cited, there is no equity. And we should treat our people fairly. The system you set up in a city needs to be tailored to the city that you're setting it up in. In my hometown of Chisholm, where I spent 50 years, the parcels are all pretty much the same. If you had one flat stormwater fee for residences, no one would be, harmed in a meaningful way because the parcels are all the same. But when we look here, we've got homes with 14,000 square feet of impervious area and homes with 2,000 square feet of impervious area, and we charge them both the same, and we call that equity. I'm sorry, that's not equity. That's not treating people fairly in my mind.
Councilmember Holtz.
Lohane, the quicker part, I'm fine with actually the yellow one in terms of, I do believe we have an equitable system. Do we have room for increased equity? Sure. There's always room for more data, more clarity, but there's always that line of, I do not support literally going and finding the impervious of every parcel in the city. No. There's other far better solutions. I'm fine with the yellow one as a process, whether it's now in the next year, I'm fine with that. In terms of the appeal process, which is one of the things you're asking for clarity on, and the credits, I'm curious. So I go and appeal my stormwater fee. What does that process look like? Do we have a SOP for that? Do we have a formula for how that works out when Pete gets to go out and, inspect my property? Like, what does that process look like? Or do you only do the credits? Or do you get to do both?
I just determine what the reduction is going to be. So we have a outline which will list what we'll be given credit for: rain barrel, rain garden, retention pond, so on and so forth like that. Then I walk the property. I look at the property to see what they have, what percentage of that water, in my estimate, will come off into that area that they're going to maintain. Some people have, like the ones I had this spring, I had drain tile, pond. The water all went to one area off the roof line and everything. Another one said they had rain barrels. There were no rain barrels on the property whatsoever. But then other people will have rain barrels. So that I make a determination off of that.
Can you, because I can see asking for a credit technically being an appeal, But I assume there's also appeals where it's not because they did anything, they just disagree with the fee. And they're gonna say, I find this wrong, right? Because there could be both in that sense, but technically a credit is kind of appealing, right?
Yeah, I only had one, which they were just looking for reduction of credit.
Yes.
And there was nothing on the property that showed that.
And
So out of
how
the
would that play out?
three-
Is there a SOP for that or a formula to help you to say when you're inspecting where they don't have a rain barrel, they don't have drain tile, to say, well, I see the square footage of the roof, I see your driveway, like, how does that work?
I don't do a calculation for that.
All right. Gotcha. That helps, thank you. To the third question, and Nate, I don't know if this is you or Jack, I know what Councilmember Dragisich is referring to at Royal. Because we've discussed this before. Can you fill in the rest of us? Because I don't know if all of us are aware what that specifically is. Are there, and I don't think there are, but are there any other stormwater ponds in the city where the HOA has a relationship with it, where it's in their development agreement? I mean, I know for Northport and Easton Village, the stormwater ponds are all city-owned and they're city-maintained. Our developer did not burden us with an ongoing obligation. I chose to move into the neighborhood with that. Like, are there other instances besides this one situation with Royal?
So Mayor and Councilman Holtz, I am not aware of any other ones than what's been raised by Councilman Dragisich. You know, I looked at a number of parcels, some of the older subdivisions in town, there's not a lot of great records on. But typically, if a pond or a stormwater that was receiving, or a pond, or a wetland that was receiving stormwater existed, it was covered by a drainage and utility easement. And there was also like some sort of maintenance declaration that put Public Works on the hook for it. So, conversations with, you know, Pete and Adam, you know, more or less Adam, because he's been here longer, I've asked questions, what do we do over here, what do we do over here? He said, yeah, we do the inspections, we do the maintenance. So, I don't want to, you know, I hope it's just an anomaly that, you know, Councilmember Dragisich is talking about as far as stormwater ponds, but, you know, so in my brief time here with the city, about a year and a half, the developments that I've seen go through are all the stormwater ponds have been public ponds, you know, contained in an outlot, you know, so.
So no one in the city is aware of any other stormwater management agreements in any other development?
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the particular situation that you've described. There are stormwater maintenance agreements, you know, for folks whose development has like a stormwater reuse system for irrigation, for example. You know, that's covered in a stormwater maintenance agreement. But as far as what has been described, you know, down in Royal Gulf, and again, this was a pretty high-level review. I worked with staff to see what we had on file. I did my own research, you know, through the GIS system, defining ownership, and conversations with others, and I didn't come across anything quite like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, because really, they're outlots that start as HOA and then they transfer over to the city, has been, at least my understanding, ever since being on planning commission, that one at Royal, I believe, is an outlier. I can't speak to how or why, but
The one in Royal actually isn't a stormwater pond because the engineer tells me, the former engineer, Jack, tells there's no stormwater that goes into that pond. It's a protected wetlands in the federal wetlands inventory, and it's also is a protected wetland under Minnesota and federal law for the Downs Lake overflow flood or whatever.
Yeah, I don't remember when this came up a little while ago, and I didn't look into it too closely, but if I'm right about the area you're talking about, it's a floodplain area.
Yep.
And it was Valley Branch that required it, that if they were gonna fill area, they were filling floodplain, which
Yeah.
would raise the flood elevations elsewhere, so they
Yeah.
needed to replace that. So it's not, in the engineering world, you're differentiating function, you know, a stormwater pond, you're usually thinking some sort of treatment. This is simply a floodplain area. It's not designed to, they're not taking credit for it for phosphorus removal and nutrient removal and
Right.
things like that, and having to maintain it from that aspect. And so we do have, from that standpoint, you do have stormwater features throughout the city. You have wetlands, you have wetland buffers, you have shorelines, you have lakes, you have ponds, you have, that are natural ponds. You have other features that are located that are in other neighborhoods that are being maintained by HOAs, those areas. It's usually a vegetation maintenance, it's not a maintaining a treatment functionality.
Yeah, because the agreement with the HOA says stormwater management agreement, and it is, you know, it requires things that would be a violation of the Wetlands Act.
And I believe that's why Engineer Stanley was suggesting maybe changing the agreement. I think that might be more out of simplicity from staff of not having 25, wetland agreement, a floodplain agreement, it was just, you have to have an easement over it.
Right.
And that was.
I just saw the other impression there were more than, we were not the only HOA with a pond that had a pond stormwater maintenance agreement.
Yeah, there are ponds associated with Fields of St. Croix Sanctuary, whether or not they have a agreement or not. They're more of a floodplain issue. I know that the one in Sanctuary, if it rises a certain level, there's 100-year, I think we had somebody try to come in, they wanted a pool.
Yeah.
And it was within a 100-year flood zone, so I can only make an assumption that that pond is somehow reflected to the previous instance of a floodwater.
Yeah, Getchell Pond.
Yeah.
Backing up to the stormwater, in my mind, a tiered residential system wouldn't be that complicated. We could break it, you put on up to a half acre, greater than a half acre to like an acre and a half, and greater than an acre and a half, like a 3-tier. They'd be simple, operate, and maintain, and would introduce more equity into the system.
Is that similar to the yellow tiered, Mr.'s?
So that would be, no, that would,
The lower
ERU,
one?
and I'll let Tim chime in here, he's more of an expert on that.
No, yeah, I think so, but you can structure, even a tiered residential system in any one of those three methodologies. So I'm with you. I think that's what's unique about the land use in Lake Elmo is that the I guess the characteristics of residential properties are pretty widely variable. So a 3-tiered system, low, medium, high, even to just match the land uses identified in the comp plan. Maybe there's a rural residential condition too. You can still do either a representative, number of residential parcels in each one of those tiers to define the ERU or the REF. I think there's plenty of ways to define that.
And I think, your situation on the commercial, the downtown's a little bit different than the other areas, but, maybe we have a different system for those concentrated commercials. Those are the two changes in my mind that would make the system reasonably equitable and not allow people to point fingers.
I guess one thing I'd like to avoid is something that has to get updated with every house. I mean, I don't think we want to get into that sort of,
I agree.
throwing dollars and picking up pennies, right?
That's why based on acreage makes it straightforward and simple.
Yes, Ms. Handler.
Do we not also then lose equity if we're doing it solely on acreage, given the different areas of town? Because the structures required in the rural area are much less. The structures required in the urban areas are more. And therefore, wouldn't the rural people sort of use less?
They
Of the
probably
cost?
do use less.
So if we're talking about straight up acreage and increasing equity, it feels like we're going in the wrong direction with that particular
I agree.
analysis. I have a
That's what's
second,
going through my head with this as well.
my other
How do the rural people pay
concern,
now? How do the
my
rural
other
peop-
concern is that when we're talking about stormwater and we're putting all of the weight on runoff and not contemplating what a base fee might be within the system. So in sewer system and water systems, we have a base fee and then a utilization charge. And so the base fee is ideally intended to look at like some, there's general overhead, there's the system itself. And so when we're talking about rainwater, the same thing exists. We have a system that we have to maintain, and then theoretically each property has a varying amount of usage or rainwater that comes with it. The fee is only $100 right now for a residential property. And so back to the mayor's point, or whoever said, we're going to make these changes, and if we contemplate a base fee and then look at runoff from there, I think we're not going to be seeing that much of a change that warrants the amount of staff time, the costs for analysis, changing yet again another system within the city, our billing systems, financial systems, our collection systems, all of that. So those are my concerns.
So I'm not opposed to a base fee. I understand the concept of a base fee, but you can have a base fee and then build on top of it. But right now, if I have a residential home in a row on 10 acres, what's my stormwater fee?
$103.
Oh, so we're already in that situation. But I mean, I think because of the way our community said, we could find a system that would be equitable, and we could have a base fee, because I agree, a base fee should be a portion of it, because we have these fixed costs. As in terms of, it takes some time and effort and cost to set up a fair system, I think saying, well, we're not gonna have an equitable system because we don't wanna spend the money to do it, is a really inappropriate position to take in my mind. We should make sure our system that we bill people on is fair and treats them equitably, so people pay their fair share. And if it costs us some money to set that up, it costs us some money to set that up.
So who's not paying their fair share currently between the 10-acre rural lot and the quarter acre moderate density? In your opinion, who's not paying their fair share right now?
The homes that have 12,000 square feet of impervious area pay the same fee as a home with 4,000 square feet of impervious area. So that higher impervious area parcel is not paying its fair share.
But
It
they
has
have
3
more
times as much
impervious
impervious.
surface that the water is going into.
Not
So it's
necessarily.
But it's not necessarily running off. So my concern is we go and do this whole process, and then there's just gonna be another variable that somebody can come back and say, well, now this is inequitable because of I have 10 acres, all this water is going into this impervious surface. I'm not using the city's resources for my water
Well, the
runoff.
impervious surface is where it doesn't go into.
So, I'm sorry, pervious. So if they have 10 acres and the 90% of it is pervious versus a quarter acre lot where 10% of it or 60% of it is pervious, I think the argument could be made the opposite way. I would love to make this more equitable as well. I don't think that there is a realistic way of doing it. I don't think the cost, to your point, I mean, and I guess maybe we just disagree on this, I don't think the cost of what it would take to make this truly equitable is feasible at this point. Now, maybe 5 years from now with AI and imaging, this is something that can be done for significantly cheaper, but asking staff to go through and look at image by image or property by property and figure this out, I don't know if that's gonna create equity. I think it's gonna create other issues as well. I mean, again, to my point of if there's a property with 90% pervious surface on 10 acres, how much of that water is actually running off and having to be managed by our water treatment systems?
The system doesn't include pervious. It's the impervious area that we're
So then,
that we're
okay, so it
basing it
has
on.
10% impervious, so just
Yeah,
flip my numbers.
Yeah.
So if the majority of the water is not even going as runoff,
Well, where does the impervious surface water go to?
impervious to the run, so if like in a neighborhood like yours, it would go towards the curbs and it would go into the stormwater.
Exactly. And that's why we base it on the impervious area.
And you're saying, and again, I guess where I'm confused is
not
you're saying the
understanding
10-acre lot is the person that's not paying their fair share right now.
No, I'm not saying the 10-acre lot isn't. I didn't say that. I said, if I have a house, and I have, maybe on an acre and a half, okay, or a 2-acre lot, and I have 12,000 square feet of impervious area, that water runs off as stormwater. If I'm in the old village and I have a small house on a small lot, I have 2,000 square feet of impervious area. my runoff goes into the street as well. But I generate 1/6 as much runoff, but I pay the same fee.
Well, in.
But how much of the runoff from that
theory,
10-acre
right?
lot is going
Into their lawn,
into
their yard.
out of their
Into the
yard
road.
and into the streets? I guess that's my point, is I don't know if it's
But our whole
solving your.
system right now is based on impervious area. Our whole system is based on it, and that's the way every system is based, on impervious area. There isn't a system, I imagine there's something somewhere, but 99 and 4400% are based on impervious area. That's the way they're calculated.
I guess my thought on this is the only way to make it then completely equitable would be you'd have to go out and evaluate every single property. I think anything short of that, we're just creating an inequity probably in a different direction.
But less of an inequity. To ask someone with 4,000 impervious square feet to pay the same as someone with 12,000 impervious square feet, it's 3 times as much runoff, and they're paying the same fee.
Well, now to be fair, that assumption is that all of the 12,000 feet runs off to the street.
Doesn't.
What's the same assumption with the 4,000?
Right. So it's not really I don't know that you can really make a direct correlation just using the impervious square feet. You do take into account the surrounding area, do you not?
But we do it now. Our system does it this way now. And I'm just saying by moving to we can reduce the inequity.
So
Are-
Mr. Olson, do you work with other communities with this issue? And, I mean, I'm sure you weighed in on the discussion with Nate regarding what Lake Elmo is using, and certainly we've heard that the process now, and I hear Councilmember Dragis's argument. It sounds like there could be a lot more detail in there. I guess I'm questioning and I hear you, if it makes it more equitable, and then, so the question always is, to what end?
The ultimate end is you measure the impervious on every single parcel in town. That's the.
But is that reasonable?
I think the conversation that you're having, where you're smiling, because it's fascinating to hear you talk about that exception where every utility assumes that every square foot of impervious makes it into your MS4. Your
Right.
municipal separate storm sewer system, right? That's what you're funding,
Right.
is your MS4. It could be based on pipe size, it could be based on pond size, treatment requirements. Other goals for things like waste load allocations and impaired water bodies. All of that and every calculation we do at the engineering level goes back to an impervious area number. And at the state level, and even at the Valley Branch Watershed District level and other watershed district level, you're assuming that the water hits that impervious surface and instantaneously makes it to the system that you have to treat. And that's not how it works, right? It's not. And so that conversation about, well, yeah, you might have 12,000 square feet of impervious, but does all of it make it into the MS4? The answer is likely no, that it doesn't all make it there. But the structure of the utility is based on the fact that your impervious surface generates a volume of runoff that has to be managed somewhere. And the assumption is that it has to be managed in the MS4, and the MS4 has to pay for ongoing maintenance.
I mean, so it's just a false assumption then, correct? I
It's
mean,
not always false.
so like a house that's on Lake Elmo, where it slopes down to the lake, the majority of that water is going into Lake Elmo, not to the street.
I would say, if I may, that might be part of the appeals process. If I'm a homeowner and I have a beautiful home on Lake Elmo and I've got a buffer distance of 1,000 feet between my house and the water, and I can calculate that my runoff doesn't make it there, and we can prove that through engineering review and defensibility with modeling and so on, there might be a basis for an appeal. But foundationally, the inherent assumption to make sure that you're managing that lake the way that the state wants you to is that all of the pollution that hits that impervious area, all of the volume that comes off of that impervious area does make it to the lake.
There's a situation, you could have a 4,000 square foot of impervious on 10 acres that has the same impact as that same amount on a half acre based upon where it's located, based upon the slope, based upon that parcel. It could have the exact same impact, or it could even have less And I fully agree. I don't know what that's, where, to a similar conversation earlier, where is that line of reasonableness? That's the ultimate discussion here. I fully agree. If there was a way for AI to do this, have at it. I don't think, it's not there yet. We know that.
I mean, otherwise, just the number of hours to do this is gonna be,
Correct. And it still could create false positives.
that's my biggest thing.
It's valid, but it can create false positives.
Question is,
That's my
is it-
concern.
Is it better than what we have now?
I
Is
don't,
it more
I don't think
equitable?
I don't think it would be, because I think it would just create
I don't know that
inequities
we
in a
know
different,
that answer.
area. I mean, we
This-
still have this problem that he was
This
just talking
reminds
about.
me of discussion with rec fees for
Oh, yeah.
buildings.
Yeah.
Somebody,
I'm old enough for that, but I don't know if others were.
the rec fees for a building, let's say when they're getting hooked up to the sewer, right? The Met Council says, I'm gonna charge you the amount for your building at maximum capacity. And building A guy says, the number of people that come into my establishment use the bathroom, 1 out of every 100 people that come into my establishment. And my establishment, by the way, does not have 100% capacity during all my hours. But yet, I think the Met Council had something, said, we have to go by something that's consistent across the 7-county metro area. And so, like that, as a city, we have to come up with something that's consistent across 24 square miles for all the residents. So I get to the question of, I understand that it can be more detailed, but when does that become burdensome and maybe too much detail that, there's some gray in there, right? I don't think everything's just black and white.
I agree, but that's why you try and strike a reasonable balance. If you say, divide into lot size, half acre or less, 2 acre, half acre to 2 acre, more than 2 acres.
So-
You find something that makes sense based on the type of development you have in your community, but not overly complicated.
So you're talking like a tiered
A
system?
tier system, yeah.
Where we have just one flat
One
system?
size fits all.
Okay.
The 4,000 square foot impervious space is the same as a 12,000 square foot.
But the
That's simply not
12,000
fair.
square guy might have everything drained to a pond in his
And the 4,000
backyard.
might too.
Might.
I mean, that's where, you look at.
So
the
I don't know that,
I
it
just think it's
doesn't,
right variable.
I don't understand that we gain much by that exercise. I'm not
A third of
convinced.
the systems nationwide do a tiered or actual impervious area.
A third.
A third, do,
Okay.
okay? When I was in Spokane, I set up the stormwater utility. In 1998, I went to my GIS department and asked them if they could tell me the amount of impervious area on every one of 78,000 parcels. And they said, yes, we can, Nick. We're 2026. This isn't rocket science. I mean, I'm not asking to go to impervious area on a per parcel basis, the most equitable system. Widely accepted as the most equitable. That would be very onerous unless we had a very detailed GIS system here that we could use. And I don't think we should go there. I just think we have to be more equitable than what we are. And I've given a number of examples. The downtown, I got a downtown 100% impervious lot, 12,000 square feet, and they pay less than a 4,000 square foot residential. And we look at residential customer in the eye and say, we're treating you fairly. I got a mansion in Whistling Valley, 12,000 square feet of impervious area, and a picture I sent to staff earlier was a small house in the old village. It was a 900 square foot house with a gravel driveway, probably 1,500 square feet of impervious area. It pays the same fee.
The gravel's considered impervious, by the way.
Yes, it is, for stormwater it is. And so I'm just saying, can we find some reasonable system that will introduce a little more equity into the calculation so that we spread these costs fairly to everybody and not have such a big discrepancy?
So you're saying something like the ERU in a tiered system?
I think he's talking about the lower one, where
No,
you
no.
said, correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about REF where you start to split up residential categories.
I think that's the way you would have to do it. ERUs would assign a single value of impervious coverage to all residential parcels, tiering the resident, because you gotta divide that number by something else for non-residential parcels. So it really would be an expanded REF system.
Woof. Now,
That-
I can defend, again, I have never once had a person complain about their fee, but that doesn't mean that, obviously, there's people that have appealed. I am fully in support of whatever staff and legal and others feel for the appeal process to make sure it's bolted shut, procedures are solid, it's always objective, clear, for transparent, no matter who is here. That should always be the case, right? That's great. So I don't know what additional feedback you would want for that. I do not support ending it, even though it's not required. I would not want to take away that right when we've established it. I have no problem if we want to go down that route of maybe it's 3 tiers for residential based upon acreage, as long as there's a sample size to try to determine what's the average impervious within
That's the way they do it.
0 to quarter acre, 5 to acre and a half. But the hard part is, then you could argue there should be 7 categories of acreage. So that's where it's just like, well, crap, we just did this. Technically, it's still not perfect. Is it better than before? Probably, as long as there's a sample size to determine the average impervious. You could also do it based upon our zoning and our comp plan too, because those zones, per our ordinance, all have a specific amount of impervious that's allowed per those zones. So you could also do it by zone as well.
I think if you continue down that REF path, that would be an appropriate way to do it. Match the level of detail in the comp plan.
Yes.
And I also agree with Finance Director that we should have a base fee to cover those fixed costs of the utility. And then whatever the volume-based fee should be, on top of that. But it would be one fee we would charge. So if I'm a residential customer on a half-acre lot, everyone would pay $60 base fee, and then you would pay an amount above for the runoff or impervious area. But we keep the residential, I would no more than 3 tiers. 3 tiers would be sufficient, I think, to provide more reasonable equity than what we currently have without creating an overly complicated system.
And is that tiers within the REF column here that we have, for the row?
Essentially, yeah. That's what.
And just from the color coding, isn't that the least equitable out of the 3? So that's where I'm a little.
That's the way I
Right.
read it.
The reason,
That's where I'm a little
the
confused.
reason for that discrepancy in equity is that you're still applying an average to that specific land use. You're calculating a sample size based on that on that zone and that land use. So anybody with a commercial property, or a mixed use property with 1 acre of impervious and one with 50 acres of impervious, they pay the same amount. So there's still a gap in equity from a land use to land use perspective. What you might find, and that red could maybe turn to orange or yellow, the more you dig into this, that is if you look at the comp plan and there's 50 different land use categories in the comp plan. One of those land use categories only has 4 parcels in it. You might get to a pretty exact value of the average, or we can take a look at that a little bit deeper, but that's where that gap in equity comes into play with the REF system,
Yeah.
is that it's still an average, it's still not a direct calculation.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's inequitable, all 3 of them are equitable, it's just the least of the 3 is what I was getting at,
Yeah,
so.
red's a tough color, I guess.
Director Handler.
Could we talk a little bit about what we're talking about in terms of dollars when we're talking about a lack of equity? Because the fee is only $103. And so if I have a big house and 10 acres and my fee is $103 and I have somebody else that's a smaller house and it's $103, and now we change that and somebody's paying 98 and somebody's paying 107, are we really
Well,
gonna be
that's-
changing the fee that much that it's more, because so far that's a cup of coffee.
If I may, from a residential perspective, maybe not. That's comparing resident to resident. The way that I've heard this equity conversation happen in front of councils in the past is how much residents pay versus how much a commercial property might pay. And is there a gap in equity between the amount of impervious and runoff and pollution that might be generated from those larger sites? So the ERU methodology helps to normalize that, where it's based on a factor or a multiple of what an average residential parcel might be. So the equity isn't, I don't think necessarily in a gap between resident to resident, but how another land use might be paying their utility. That's how I've seen it expressed. We've had some additional conversations tonight about equity and, and transparency, maybe is a better word, but that's what I've heard from councils and I've seen and we've tried to overcome, is saying that if a commercial site that's 100 acres, that's 95% impervious, are they paying enough? Are they subsidizing enough of the repair? Or is it really all on the residents to subsidize those repairs?
I'm with Councilmember Holtz on not getting rid of the credit issue. I know that it does take time, but it's been enacted and some people have it, and maybe it could be, some actions could be done to tighten that up, or how that's reviewed in the future, but do I have an answer for that? No. I understand that things, in my opinion, I do agree that things could be more calculated, more change. I tend to think that the effort, and it's hard to say, because when we're talking about equity, I hear Director Hadler and I hear Councilmember Dragisich, and in my mind, I struggle with spending $30,000 for something that's gonna change something fairly I just don't know. Maybe it does make a change big enough, maybe it doesn't. I don't know if I wanna spend the money just to find that out. If we have a system in place that's, you say 30% or a third of the communities use that, does that mean the 67% of the communities are doing what we're doing now, and that's good enough? Because then, I don't wanna, I kind of feel like I'm chasing my tail.
Again, each community, you have to look at the community and say, what's the diversity of properties in the community that would drive you to make those changes? If the community is fairly homogeneous, like my hometown of Chisholm, it'd be no sense in doing it. The properties are all so similar. But where we have the vast diversity that we have here in Lake Elmo, from houses on 10 acres to houses on 2/10 of an acre, there's this great diversity. And trying to find equity in that great diversity, 100% equity, I agree, is not possible. But you can make it as equitable as possible, and while still keeping it fairly simple, and improve the equity that we currently have. Again, telling that homeowner with 4,000 square feet, he pays the same amount as a homeowner with 12,000 square feet, and that's fair, look him in the eye and tell him, I'll tell you what he'll say.
Well, I hear you on that point, but there are all kinds of factors that go into the water runoff.
But the factor we use is impervious.
But can you agree that, even if you make that change, the guy with 10,000 impervious acres may not contribute any water runoff to the street than the 2,000 square feet? Is that, I'm asking the question, do you think that could be the case?
On an individual basis, probably, I would agree it's possible, but on an aggregate basis, I think generally if we use impervious area, we're going to create a system that's much more equitable than what we have now.
Okay. I don't know.
I agree.
I'm open to looking at a different method of calculating it, but I think the method of using impervious surface percentage is fundamentally flawed, and I'm just not open to looking at a method using that. And again, I know that's what we're using now. I don't want to change from one fundamentally flawed method to another fundamentally flawed method and spend $60,000 in the process of doing that. So if we're gonna spend, I'd rather spend $100,000 and figure out a different way to do this, because I think there's too many variables that are just excluded when we're just using impervious surface. So I'm not saying our current system is equitable, and I'd love to find a more equitable way to do it. But going from one flawed method to another is just, I don't want to spend $60,000 to do that.
All right.
Well, thank you, Tim.
Actually, it's been a really good
This was really
discussion,
interesting,
but I just feel like we're doing this.
In my experience, this takes 2 or 3 conversations, not one. So
Yeah.
I'd be happy to come back if we want to revisit this at some point.
Sure.
This is really helpful, though.
Yeah, thank you.
So, just for some clarification to help, if this is going to continue or if this is gonna, do something else, staff's recommendation right now is to maintain the current system, the current calculation system. What I'm hearing, about the, appeals process is that I think I'm hearing that we want to maintain we want to maintain some sort of appeal, but you're wondering if we can collectively as a staff come up with some tweaks to
Yeah, if you can make it better.
tighten it up.
Perfect.
Well, because we don't know what we don't do the appeals. Like, we don't know what the procedure, that's why I was asking,
We just know that we had 5 of them come
Yeah.
through back
Yep.
in May.
just to make, we presume they're working anyways, just make sure they're amazing and beautiful.
There's 4 of them approved and 1 of them not.
All right, so as far as, go ahead.
The other thing I would ask is for the city attorney to look at our ordinance, and we have some problems with the language of the ordinance now, and that we should make a correction and make the ordinance consistent with state statute.
Can you give maybe a little more definition to that, council member?
Well, there's a section in the ordinance that provides for reduced stormwater fee, and that section is inconsistent with state law.
Okay.
And so we could probably just remove it, or, I'm not an attorney, but modify it in some way to bring it into consistency.
I believe Councilmember Dragisich is referring to what's in the ordinance. It's a hardship credit is what it's called. Now, that wasn't something that we talked about tonight, but it does exist, and I believe that's what he's talking about.
Okay,
Sure.
fair enough.
Illegal?
Make sure we're on the up and up. I think we need to talk about it future, and if we're gonna do something, it needs to be addressed for the budget, for next year.
I'm completely agreeable with that, Mayor. I wasn't hoping that, I knew we'd probably have to get down and find the funds for it in the budget and probably, another conversation. We appreciate everyone's time and thought, and I may have done 1 or 2 of these as a consultant in the past, so I probably have
course
some
you have.
bias.
No.
All right,
Right, well, thank you very much. So
Thank you.
Right now,
Thank you.
we're just gonna
stand pat.
stand pat, and I'll circle with
Yep,
staff, and we'll look at the appeals process, and we'll come back to you at some point.
yep.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
I read your memo, and I said, wait till I get these guys up at the stand. You guys did a wonderful job. Thank you.
All right, council reports. Councilmember Dragisich.
Well, I have about a 4-hour report, so you guys don't want to take it. I don't have any report
You
this
wake
evening.
me up when you're done.
No report.
Councilmember Holtz.
This Saturday, the Young Eagles at the airport will be doing free flights starting at a certain time. It's either 8 or 9 a.m., but you can find information on the Young Eagles through the EAA. It's for kids up through the age of 17. They do it usually the first Saturday of the summer. Obviously, they didn't last Saturday, but that'll be this week. Also, there will soon be purchases coming up for the holiday banner for downtown and the Lake Elmo banner for downtown when it's not the holiday season and it's not the July 4th season. And just kudos and thank you to staff, to Kathy, and to Connect Lake Elmo for their feedback in that process. They will look amazing. Excuse me.
Had a chance to be involved in the kids' parade, the 4th of July parade this past weekend. Big thanks to Pete and his team for, even with all the construction that was going on, very well coordinated. Huge thanks to Connect Lake Elmo for getting volunteers out there and having an assortment of activities for kids to participate in. I think they did a rough number, calculated people watching the parade was somewhere around 2,200 with a total of roughly a little over 3,000 people. They said 3,300 let's ballpark it, because people move around and maybe they get clicked once, maybe they get clicked twice, maybe they never get clicked, so somewhere in that ballpark. We had a great day, it was warm. I think the kids had a great time. There was even some, the parents or grandparents get to pull their grandkids in the cart and have a good time, and plenty of candies were thrown around, and so thank you to the Rotary for providing ice cream for everybody that attended. I know that's a big undertaking, and Dairy Queen did donate, I think, 250 dilly bars from what I understand. So a lot of community involvement, and thank you for the Sheriff's Department for participating, and also our Fire Department for providing their trucks and assistance out there. So I think it's very unique that you just have something that doesn't have politicians and commercial businesses and things of that nature, where the kids just smile, and I mean, some of them don't even know why they're there, but it's good to have in the 250th anniversary of our country, and it was fun to see. So
I'll just add, I have gotten a lot of feedback from the community already about the banners, so again, thanks for getting that set up, and then just second everything with the parade. It was great, and thanks to the mayor for being the dunk tank guy.
Which it was kind of warm, I'm gonna tell you, the
was.
first time's a shocking thing, but after that, you want the kids to hit that, you want them to hit that target
Back in
and
here.
cool back off a little bit. Councilmember Cragness,
No report.
staff reports.
Sure. So we have our Walker art system that was installed on the second floor of the city center for a public art display. We do have that open to the community. We received a couple of submissions. Also, our employee engagement committee is exploring an employee art project, maybe, so Lake Elmo related, so we'll see what happens with that. And at the end of June, we had 7 staff members and 2 council members attend the League of Minnesota Cities Conference in Rochester, where we were able to participate in some engaging professional sessions, as well as networking and then team building with our team. And so just want to thank you for allowing us to participate in that as well. And then I do think that if we could just do a quick check-in, the city celebration now in September is only a couple months away. And so just kind of to recap, so I feel a little bit better about each individual council member's role or what they're working on. And I'll just start by reminding you that we have the band and the stage secured. And then city staff has created a map that we're gonna distribute to the mayor to just see what your thoughts are. But then for the rest of the things, bouncy house, tents, tables, chairs, and vendors, just
Yeah.
kind of take an opportunity to see where we're all at.
Yeah, could you send me a map on where you want the food trucks, because
Yeah.
I've been getting asked that.
Yeah,
from-
yep, we will, so
from
we're
vendors.
just working on finalizing it.
Okay, great.
I will secure the tents this week, tables, chairs.
I will test out the food vendors that Nick gets.
Any taker on bouncy house?
Okay, I can do that again. I just
Houses.
didn't, from our discussion previously, I didn't know if that was something we wanted to do again, but I can take that on.
I think it was well received.
Okay, yeah.
I heard some feedback, a bigger one.
A bigger one, yeah, more. Oh, okay, that's good to know. How many do you think?
Just something bigger.
Just bigger.
Bigger.
Bigger's better.
Go big or go home.
Bigger slide? I think it was pretty big. I don't know.
I don't know.
Options
I'm not
for
climbing
slightly
up there
older
then.
kids.
I'm scared of heights as is. I wouldn't go any higher than that thing.
Okay, and anything else for that?
I think that's it. Ms. Doyle?
No report.
Okay, Mr. First?
No report.
No report.
You sure?
Positive.
All right. Ms. Hadler?
Just to let you know, our online payment system will be offline on Thursday, this Thursday, as they implement my final module of my absolute favorite software in the whole planet. Thank you again for that.
Mr. Stanley?
No report.
Mr. Tholen?
No report.
Ms. Sensala?
No report.
All right. With that, folks, future agenda items can be found on the meeting packet online. With that, we'll adjourn at 9:52. Have a good evening.